The committee will come to order. I want to thank the witnesses for being here and the University of California, Santa Cruz for hosting us. This is the first time in several years the Armed Services Committee has left the bubble of D.C. for a hearing. We chose to come to Silicon Valley to hear directly from America's leading innovators about solutions to a problem that has vexed the Department of Defense for decades. Why does the DoD continue to struggle with rapidly developing, scaling, and delivering innovation to our warfighters? For years, we've been hearing complaints from industry about the glacial pace of acquisitions and from small innovators that lack the capital and support necessary to bridge the valley of death. This is immensely frustrating to us because this committee has spearheaded dozens of efforts over the last decade to reform DoD's acquisition processes, create new flexible acquisition pathways, and make it easier for the DoD to partner with private sector to expedite the fielding of innovation. It also is frustrating because our time to solve this problem is running out. China has invested heavily in new capabilities that are key to success on future battlefields, and they've figured out how to rapidly deploy them. Make no mistake, these capabilities are being developed specifically to defeat our military. We cannot let that happen. We can't let China or any adversary outpace us on innovation. Fortunately, the United States has something our adversaries do not, a robust innovation ecosystem. There is no shortage of innovative Americans, especially here in Silicon Valley, with the ideas and know-how to keep us ahead of our adversaries. We must take better advantage of this. And we've seen in Ukraine the side that is faster at innovating, scaling, and deploying has the advantage on the battlefield. Earlier this year, we held a similar hearing with senior DoD officials who insisted they had all the authorities they needed and were doing everything they can to expedite innovation. We're here today because we respectfully disagree. We think more can be done and should be done. We want to hear from American innovators on whether DoD's acquisition pathways are actually working. And we're eager to hear your recommendations for improving them. Finally, we want to know your thoughts on how we can overcome DoD's historic aversion to moving fast and taking risk when it comes to innovation. With that, I yield to my friend, the ranking member, for any opening statement he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And mostly I want to thank you very much for holding this hearing and making the decision to come out here and have this incredibly important conversation. I think it is, one of the two most important things that we need to do to get our national security right and to have the adequate defense that we need for this country. Personnel being the other side of that, which I, applaud your efforts on that as well, and setting up the Quality of Life Commission. But I continue to be concerned that the Department of Defense is not able to innovate quickly enough to keep pace with our potential adversaries. And we have, as the chairman has outlined, struggled with this for a number of years. We have, primarily under the leadership of Mac Thornberry, when he was chair of this committee, given the authority to the Department of Defense to make innovations in a variety of different ways. There's one important caveat to that, which I'll get to at the end of my statement. But that authority is there, and yet we still move too slowly. We are very focused on requirements and process as opposed to being focused on solutions. And an example I've used many times, I met with Stanford has a thing called Hacking for Defense, which is at a whole bunch of different universities where they take a group of undergraduates and give them a real-world Department of Defense problem, something that DoD is trying to solve, and ask them a question. Here's what we want. And when I met with the students who went through that process, every single group said the same thing. The first thing we figured out is that they were asking the wrong question. Okay, that they were actually focused on solving something else. So we pivoted and we adapted and we solved that problem. Well, within the DoD world, that adaptation and pivot is very slow because the requirements, because the process is built in. We'll spend years trying to answer the wrong question just because that's what was set in motion. We've got to be able to pivot and adapt and move more quickly. And I think a big part of it is culture within DoD. But all of you have experience in working in that, and we would love to hear your particular stories about what didn't work and, crucially, how it could work better. We have a bunch of changes that need to be made there, and we want to work on that. The one caveat, yes, we have given the DoD a great deal of authority, but at the end of the day, we still appropriate. There is the authority for other transactional authority decisions and a whole series of other things where DoD can theoretically make a decision to skip the normal requirements process and move more quickly. But Congress lays out, they got to have money to do that. And if we appropriate down to the last penny and restrict their ability to move it around, that authority doesn't help them. So one thing, I know this committee, we need to work with our friends on the Appropriations Committee to see how we can build in greater flexibility so that the Pentagon can use the authority that we've given them. But I just want to close by emphasizing how important this is. Whoever gets there first on the new technology has an enormous advantage, and that's been true for as long as human civilization has existed and tried to defend itself against their adversaries. And there are all kinds of historical examples of who figured out the machine gun first, or the tank first, or the nuclear bomb first. Now this is happening weekly, if not daily. You know, new technologies are being developed for drones and for counter drones, for secure communications, or how to disrupt communications so that your missile loses its signal in mid-flight and can't hit its target. This is happening day in and day out. We need to get ahead of that. And the chairman's right. We should be able to do that. We are still the most innovative economy in the world. Best universities, best capital markets, entrepreneurship. We've got it. We just have to figure out how to make sure the government is able to access that in an effective way to give our warfighters what they need to meet our national security needs. With that, I look forward to the testimony. And again, I thank the chairman for holding this hearing.
I thank the ranking member. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. First, we have Mr. Mark Valentine as the President of Global Government Business for Skydio. Mr. Brendan Singh is the co-founder and president of Shield AI. Mr. Shyam Sankar, I get that right? All right. Okay. Shyam Sankar, I knew I'd mess it up, is the Chief Technology Officer for Palantir. Mr. Peter Ludwig is the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer for Applied Intuition. And Mr. Richard Jenkins, co-founder of SDrone. I want to welcome our witnesses. Mr. Valentine, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee. It's a real honor to be here in front of you today. Thank you so much. I am Mark Valentine. I'm the president of our government business at Skydio, where we are the largest drone manufacturer, small drone manufacturer in the United States and the largest in the world outside of China. Rapid acquisition is an important topic, and I'm really happy to be here today. It's also a timely one because acquiring the capabilities represented by the folks at this table is absolutely essential for deterrence and success if that deterrence fails. So my journey in this space began long before I came to Skydio. As a combat fighter pilot, I have a special appreciation for the shift that we're seeing in military air power today and the way that small drones are actually transforming warfare. The war in Ukraine is highly instructive in this next generation of air power. So when I was flying combat missions in the Middle East, drones were relatively large and they were very expensive. Also, and even though they were providing outstanding support to our troops and great situational awareness to our commanders, they were very, very expensive and typically required lots of people to make them work. And for the most part, they were created to not work in a contested environment. So the battlefield today, though, is fundamentally different. Drones are smaller, they're smarter, they're attritable, and often they are as important to ground personnel as the rifles that they carry. In short, these drones are no longer nice-to-haves. They're absolutely essential on the modern battlefield. On the battlefield in Ukraine, troops rarely maneuver or even fire a shot unless they have some small ISR drone in the air. So we at Skydio actually understand this very well. We've been sending drones to Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. We currently have over 1,000 systems in country now, and we have many more that are on the way. Our employees have gone to Ukraine more than 25 times in the last year and a half. And we've recently started hiring personnel to be there full-time so that we can get access to not only assist end users, but be able to make more rapid iteration based on these lessons we were taking from the modern battlefield. So these lessons that we're taking from also our commercial drones are improving our products, which directly help the United States military and our allies. As an example, the AI capabilities that are built into our newest drone, the X-10D, make it more survivable on the electronic warfare regime in Ukraine and also in the urban canyons of New York City. So based on these improvements, the Ukrainians have requested thousands of systems, and we are getting them on the way as soon as we can. These advanced AI and autonomy capabilities and our ability to scale manufacturing are what is driving that success in Ukraine and for our Department of Defense partners. We now manufacture well over 1,000 drones per month with the ability to rapidly scale to over 2,000 very quickly. This has allowed us to deliver thousands of drones on time and on budget to every branch of the United States military and support the programs of record in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marine Corps. Our AI capabilities are also instrumental in DoD's AI for Small Unit Maneuver program, which seeks to distribute the intent of a single human to multiple autonomous systems. And this is a game changer for drones. From one operator operating a single system to a single operator distributing their intent to multiple robots, some that are in the air, some that are on the water, and some that are on the ground, is the game changer. So my written statement includes several recommendations for improving DoD's acquisition of these capabilities, but I'd like to leave you with two things before we get to questions. First, the best way to improve U.S. drone capabilities is to surge American-made small drones to Ukraine right now. Not only is that going to help tilt the battle in the favor of Ukraine, it's also going to give us the ability to take advantage of an area where, bar none, it is the most challenging environment in the world. It's the best proving ground for drones. So if we believe these drones are going to be valuable in deterring conflict in the future, or if deterrence fails, allowing us to prevail, then we absolutely need these systems in Ukraine now so that we can iterate, learn, and improve our own capabilities. The second is that DoD's inventory of these small drones is woefully inadequate for great power competition. Ukraine goes through about 10,000 of these drones a month, and as of right now, our best estimate is that the entire U.S. Department of Defense has about 5,000, and the procurement programs are only procuring roughly 1,000 a year. So regardless of the acquisition pathway we choose, the department has to dramatically increase these numbers. Failure to do so is going to result in not enough drones when they're needed, and more importantly, a manufacturing base that is incapable of properly scaling at the time of need. And I don't share this as a drone company executive. I share this as an American citizen and as a combat veteran fighter pilot who wants and absolutely needs our military to have the capability to deter, and if that deterrence fails, then to prevail in great power conflict. So luckily, you all have the opportunity to rectify these issues and accelerate the procurement of these drones and the technologies at this table, and do so at a scale that makes our adversaries think twice before provoking conflict. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I really do look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Mr. Singh, you're up.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and HASC members, thank you for hosting this hearing on acquisition. The legislative work you are doing is vital, and I appreciate your consideration and swift action, and thank you for your service. My name is Brandon Sang. I'm the co-founder and president of Shield AI, a 9-year-old multi-billion-dollar defense technology company I founded with my brother in 2015. I'm an engineer, a former Navy SEAL, and a former surface warfare officer with deployments to the Pacific, the Arabian Gulf, and twice to Afghanistan. Shield AI's mission and my mission is to protect service members and civilians with artificially intelligent systems. And to achieve this mission, we are building the world's best AI pilot, which is self-driving autonomy technology for aircraft. Shield AI won the DARPA Alpha dogfight in 2020, beating all other AI pilots and human pilots in simulation. We have more flight hours than any company in the world flying jet aircraft autonomously. The Secretary of the Air Force flew in one of our AI pilot F-16 flights back in May. We also build and manufacture an AI-piloted drone, the MQ-35 VBAT, which accomplishes the same mission as a $40 million or $100 million aircraft at a fraction of the cost. Most recently, this drone, the VBAT, has been used by the Ukrainian military to successfully execute a first-of-its-kind, deep penetration, long-endurance strategic targeting mission while GPS and communications were being actively jammed, resulting in unprecedented effects for the Ukrainians. What makes these operations possible is the cutting-edge software that we build. My perspectives on acquisition are informed by my experiences working through acquisition problems every single day at Shield AI for the past 9 years. Going from zero to hundreds of millions in revenue, a very unique perspective few have in this industry. And this experience leads me to some recommendations for you today. My first recommendation is shifting the DoD from a requirements-based acquisition system to a problem-based acquisition system. Henry Ford once stated, if I asked people what they wanted, they would ask for faster horses. The DoD quite literally has been buying faster horses for the past 60 years. This is because the DoD acquisition process is not built to solve problems. It is built to fulfill requirements, which takes anywhere from 3 to 20 years to validate and budget just to get faster horses. To remain relevant and competitive, the warfighter should tell industry about their problems in the most intimate detail. Then industry submits a novel solution. Don't give me a spec that says, thou shalt fly at 1,000 miles per hour for 8 hours. Instead, I prefer you to tell me, I need to have strategic effects in this area, and this is what I'm up against. And ask me, how would you solve it? Then let companies tell you how they would solve it. For instance, Northrop may try to solve the problem with the Global Hawk, General Atomics may try to solve the problem with an MQ-9, Lockheed may offer an F-35, Shield AI may offer an autonomous swarm of VBATs to solve the problem. But the DoD can choose the best solution for the problem or a combination of the solutions for the problem instead of one that just meets the requirements. Second, the current House NDAA contains Section 833, Autonomous Unmanned Aerial System Acquisition Pathways. This should be used much more. This would create a contracting preference for the DoD to use a dual acquisition pathway for integrating autonomy onto new and existing military aircraft. The Air Force's NGAD Family of Systems program is already using this process, and more programs should in the future. It's worth noting that there's similar language in the Senate bill, which will surely be conferenced. My third recommendation centers around increasing the funding and fielding of AI pilots, which is self-driving autonomy technology for aircraft. This technology enables unmanned systems to execute missions without GPS communications or remote pilots. It also enables the concept of swarming, which enables a single person to command hundreds of thousands of drones effectively on the battlefield. With Russia, China, and Iran jamming GPS and communication links to stop our legacy drones and weapons, and their proliferation of surface-to-air missile systems to stop our manned fighter jets, AI pilots or self-driving autonomy has become the single most important technology since stealth and GPS-guided munitions. AI pilots for drones and our weapon systems allow us to restore air superiority, our most strategic conventional deterrent. But today, autonomy is funded at levels that lack credibility or seriousness, largely because requirements writers don't know how to write software requirements, and without a requirement, there is no budget, there is no program of record. These are hard problems to solve, and I applaud you all in Congress, the DoD, and industry leaders that you see seated here before you, and the other companies present that are committed to solving these problems. Thank you for having me today on the committee.
Mr. Sankar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and the distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity. I think we can all agree that we are in no ordinary state. We've had more than 100 attacks on U.S. bases by Iran, 1,200 slaughtered in a pogrom in Israel, hundreds of thousands dead in brutal combat in Ukraine, unprecedented tempo of gray zone and phase zero operations by CCP. It's clear that we're living through a pretty hot Cold War here. And unlike World War II, where America was the best at mass production, today our adversary is. And given the vast sums that we've spent on defense in these decades of Pax Americana, it would be reasonable to wonder what went wrong. In 1993, after the end of the Cold War, America wanted a peace dividend, and defense spending was slashed 67%. The Secretary of Defense held a dinner in the Pentagon, the so-called Last Supper, where he told the 51 prime contractors that they were not all going to survive. Today, there are 5. The actual consequence of the Last Supper is not a lack of competition in the defense industrial base. It's actually the fundamental decoupling of commercial innovation from defense and the rise of the government monopsony. Consolidation bred conformity and pushed out the crazy founders and innovative engineers. That is until now. Today, we are witnessing a first breakfast. America's commercial sector is reindustrializing and innovating at an incredible pace. The challenge before us is not whether America's industrial base is too small or too slow, but rather, why is the government unable to fully realize the potential? And I think the antidote is simple. Allow the free market to build commercial solutions to problems that meet the government's needs, and then actually buy those solutions. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, 86% of defense spending went to companies that had both a commercial and defense business. Chrysler made cars and missiles. Ford made satellites until 1990. General Mills, the cereal company, made artillery and inertial guidance systems. But today, that 86% has become 6%. The monopsony's fixation on cost-type contracting has made working in the national interest a bad business, suitable only to risk-averse investors who are addicted to dividends and buybacks. That is not what the most dynamic parts of the American economy look like. That's what the dying parts look like. The last defense company to be added to the S&P 500 was 46 years ago until Palantir's inclusion this month. But we will not be the last, because today the founders are back in the hundreds around this table with me, backed by hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital to build in the national interest. So the question is, how do we harness this? First, industry needs to build, and that requires government to buy. Ukraine expended 10 years of munitions in 10 weeks. That is a clarion call that America needs to fire up production. We need years worth of weapons for our own needs. Second, let us prove that the things that we have been building with great treasure over the last decade will actually even meet its moment in the modern battlefield. Ukraine shows us that it is not what your weapon system is able to do today, but how quickly you can adapt it to continue working tomorrow. Third, if we want to compete with China, we need to learn to compete with ourselves more inside of government. We need more crazy. The CCP is not going to know and be able to predict what we're going to do because we don't even know what we're going to do. America's strengths are fundamentally creative and improvisational. And that underscores the problem with procurement. The predictability is a weakness. Highlighting that rigid procurement process puts us at risk. Everyone, the Russians, the Chinese, have given up on communism except for Cuba and the DoD. 5-year centralized plans, a focus on costs, not value. Measuring time spent, not time saved. If you want to start a new thing, you have to go ask for money that you might possibly get 2 years from now. That's actually insane. America's private sector has figured out how to dynamically reprogram money inside of a quarter to get and be able to buy what they need to win. The DoD ought to as well. And we must do that because we have to remember the only requirement is winning. So a few actionable recommendations for the committee. First, we should empower Cocoms as buyers. Even moving 5% of the budget to them enables strategic competition with the services to ensure that we beat back the worst instincts of the monopsony. Second, while our system is actually quite excellent at solving problems that can be solved deductively and top down, it is horrible at solving problems that require induction and iteration. Ironically, those things are the very strengths of American culture. And that's why we need more joint urgent operational need statements, or JUONSs, or their service cousins, the ONSs, not less. The folks who are crazy enough to submit JUONSs, they don't toe the party line. People like Bill Perry, one of these heretics. He pushed through stealth and GPS not through PPBE, but by going around it. Or folks like Admiral Rickover, who built the nuclear navy with 30 years of protection from Congress against his own service. Heretics, but also heroes. We at this table, those at the first breakfast, we're not just ready, we are painfully eager to ensure that America's warfighters want for nothing. I don't think we require new process or some massive overhaul. We just need the freedom to do what industry does best, to build. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sankar. Mr. Ludwig, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee for this opportunity to testify at this important hearing. As co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Applied Intuition, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Silicon Valley. We're grateful for your leadership and willingness to highlight the important national security work in America's hub of innovation. 7 years ago, Kasser Yunus and I founded Applied Intuition with the goal of accelerating the adoption of safe and intelligent machines. We began in the commercial automotive industry, and now, today, work with 18 of the top 20 global non-Chinese automakers. We produce some of the best software in the world for unmanned systems in both the commercial and defense sectors. Specifically for defense customers, Applied provides the software to rapidly field and safely update autonomous systems. Our government-validated solutions are modular, platform agnostic, and commercially proven. Since 2021, Applied has worked with the Department of Defense and was awarded 3 small business innovation research contracts and a tactical funding increase this year. These contracts highlight that the DoD recognizes the value of cutting-edge commercial technology for military applications. They also demonstrate growing interest by both the Army and Air Force for applied software solutions. While SBIRs are a valuable entry point for startups, what matters most is how quickly the DoD scales proven transformational technology. The Defense Innovation Unit has played a critical role in aligning commercial technology to programs of record. Through DIU's Other Transactions Authority and the Software Acquisition Pathway, the Army's Robotic Combat Vehicle program is using applied tools to test and evaluate autonomy software. Unfortunately, the adoption of these agile acquisition tools and firm fixed-price contracts is lagging across the DoD. Meanwhile, China's commercial and military sectors are poised to leapfrog the U.S. in autonomous systems, and there's tremendous evidence for that in the automotive sector. In response, the DoD must pursue thoughtful program design that incorporates continuous development and integration. Our warfighters need seamless software updates on the battlefield. Software is never finished, and it becomes obsolete if it does not evolve at the speed of relevance. Second, the DoD should build and strong collaboration with the commercial industry. We applaud the work of this committee and the Appropriations Committee to evaluate DIU and its Innovation Hedge Fund. We encourage Congress to provide continued political support and robust funding for that unit. Finally, successful deployment of software capabilities will require expanded use of the software acquisition pathway. Program officers should be encouraged to more extensively utilize these innovative pathways and firm fixed-price contracts. This is because they are outcomes-driven, scale easily, and facilitate continuous improvements. Applied Intuition is proud to accelerate the software-defined and provide warfighters the technology they need to safeguard our national security. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ludwig. Mr. Jenkins, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm pleased to offer my thoughts on the DoD acquisition process from the perspective of a small business transitioning its products from demonstrated operational success to large-scale recurring fleet operations. I'm the founder and CEO of SDrone, the U.S. company based in Alameda, California. SDrone is a world leader in providing oceanographic and C5 ISRT data solutions with autonomous uncrewed surface vehicles. SDrone was one of the first technologies to be funded by DIUX, and more recently, DIU enabled a significant deployment in 4th Fleet, supporting counter-narcotics and wide area domain awareness. Our unmanned surface vehicles continue to rapidly evolve their capabilities due to high cadence, year-round operations while facing real adversaries. In my view, only in the face of real long-duration deployments will solutions reach their full maturity and utility. SDrones continue to prove their value and have undergone metric-based evaluations by OUSDI, amongst others. As an example, a recent report by the Center for Naval Analysis on SDrone effectiveness as a radar platform reviewed 4 months of SDrone operations of continuous fleet operations. The report concluded the cost of radar coverage to be around $4 per square mile from a SDrone and around $88 per square mile from a DDG, considering only operations costs, not platform acquisition. That is a 95% cost reduction. Now, I'm not suggesting that a SDrone can replace a destroyer, but if we can use low-cost autonomous systems like SDrone to undertake roles that a ship would otherwise perform, we can free up ship time for much high-value tasks and take advantage of their unique capabilities. The same parallel exists for other SDrone services, such as seafloor mapping and anti-submarine warfare, which can free up time from the Tagos fleet, destroyers, submarines, and even P-8s, enabling them to be positioned elsewhere, doing higher-value tasks that only those assets can do. If we want more ships at sea, then the fastest and most cost-effective way to achieve this is to free up our existing fleet by removing long-endurance and persistent-present tasks that only unmanned systems like SDrone can fulfill. However, despite proven performance, demonstrated cost efficiencies, and multiple requests for SDrone services from different fleets, the service-level budget process lacks the flexibility to scale up these capabilities in the near term. The current POM process requires funds to be requested multiple years in advance of the money being spent. This creates a multi-year gap between being validated to when it can be deployed at scale, the classic valley of death paradigm. To address this challenge, I ask you to consider the creation of a dedicated bridge fund within a services budget, a fund to immediately roll out new technologies that are proven effective, have adequate demand signals, and are being included in the service's future POM submission. DIU has greatly increased the department's ability to rapidly find and field commercial technologies. Now, the service needs the ability to immediately scale those solutions and not wait multiple years for dedicated funds to arrive. Critically, this bridge fund would not be intended for R&D or expanding funding for existing programs. The bridge fund would instead specifically address the valley of death years between validation of technology and the arrival of appropriations 2 years later. This approach would solve two of the most significant pain points of the current budgeting process. Firstly, services would benefit from 2 years of additional operational experience while the budgeting process plays out. This technical de-risking is essential to enable bold budget decisions, which will be critical to modernising the future DoD. Secondly, privately funded companies would have headlights for near-term growth, enabling additional capital, additional capital investment, scaling of inventory, growing manufacturing facilities, as well as internally resourcing continued capability development. In line with my bridge fund proposal, I was happy to see language in the FY25 House Defence Appropriations Bill, which provides DAU with $240 million for finding innovative projects that the services are committed to budgeting.
Thank the witnesses. I now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Valentine, you talked about this large volume of drones being consumed by Ukraine, yours and others. Tell me some of the things that you've learned during this process of seeing your product deployed and others in Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Rogers. At a high level, I think you actually mentioned in your opening remarks one of my biggest lessons, and that is speed matters. I think in the United States, I know from my background in the military, we have faced the last 20, 30 years where we have not been fighting a peer competitor. So in our minds, we launch 8 F-16s out, we always expect 8 to come back. And we need to get our head wrapped around the fact that in a great power competition or great power conflict, we're going to launch those 8 airplanes and they're not all going to come back. And what are we going to do? And so what we have seen in Ukraine so far is, first, drones actually are making a strategic difference. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look to see how the Russians have tried to counter to prevent the Ukrainians from getting value out of that. And the way they've done that primarily is through electronic warfare, jamming either the radio frequency from the controller to the drone, or in many cases also jamming the satellite navigation systems so that the Ukrainians can't get value out of those drones. They can't get them to go where they need to go. And they're so important to the Ukrainians because they're using them as, back in my old language, I would call them forward air controllers to spot targets and then guide either artillery, rockets, or human-powered FPV drones to be strikers on those targets. So combating this electronic warfare has been a rapidly evolving tete-a-tete, make improvement, countermeasure happens, and it is literally a cat and mouse game, and the only way to win it is to move fast. And another part of this is that we are living in a software-defined world, and once we realize we're living in that software-defined world, the ability to rapidly iterate, with companies that are dual use, that are iterating quickly in the commercial space, that can now bring those rapid innovations in the defense space and also take additional lessons from there. That is a critical component. So moving fast and then being able to do that at scale, I think, is the biggest lesson and the biggest takeaway that I've had from Ukraine.
At scale, define what you mean, because you talked about the volume that you have been putting into that theater and said that it was also other companies putting large volumes. What do you consider a good scale?
Well, I would look at the rate at which Ukraine is losing small ISR drones, and that's roughly 10,000 a month, and I think that's probably a good benchmark. And when I look at what they're losing per month and what we currently have in our inventory, I think, my goodness, we would last less than 2 months in a great power conflict, and I just personally think that's unacceptable. And I think there are some ways around it. Perhaps we start to think about, especially small attritable systems, like we think of other attritable things like ammunition, and we start to stockpile them, whether that's in the form of finished goods, whether that's in the form of at least the constituent opponents being on our own shores, so that if we do have a demand shock, we can rapidly assemble them. I think we have to start exploring those types of things.
I was listening to Mr. Lugwood's statement, though. If we stockpile this kind of technology, it's going to be antiquated in 6 months. I mean, how do we get around that?
Yes, sir. I think if you look at devices as just a piece of hardware may or may not be true, but I go back to the statement that we are living in a software-defined world. As an example, when we first sent drones to Ukraine, they actually didn't perform very well because of the radio, but it was a software-defined radio, and once we figured that out, we were able to take that radio, which was a multi-band radio, and create a software-defined frequency hopping schema so that we could avoid the electronic warfare. And that actual innovation, once we got that feedback, we made that software change in days. We're able to test it in a few more days and actually get it out to the field for field testing a few days after that. And so I think you can iterate and stockpile at the same time.
Okay. Mr. Singh, I'd ask the same question. I just think Ukraine has been a great laboratory for us to test things. What have you learned in your experience with your products there?
100%, sir. It's been a great laboratory. What I think the Ukrainians have discovered is that they're not going to use anything that doesn't work on the battlefield, period. And the amount of U.S. equipment that they do not use is staggering because it simply does not work. And that is everything from our most exquisite weapon systems to cheap drones.
Wait a minute, give me an example. You can't just throw that one out there and leave it.
We've been on the battlefield in HIMARS systems, right? Which is an incredible weapon system that I have used to great success in Afghanistan. And look, there are variants of the munition that work without GPS, right? These are the laser-guided rounds. But when you use a round that does not work or that is principally reliant on GPS, the effects are highly volatile and rare that you will actually hit things. And I think we need to take a big look at that as we start to think about great power competition and have a really honest look at what we are buying and fielding and saying, will it work without GPS? Will it work without communications? And I get nervous because I have been involved with these U.S. military exercises that tout, and there are very few of them, that we're going to jam GPS and jam communications, and then they go back on the word. They say, you know what, we're actually not going to do that because too many of our things we know are going to fail, and that is the complete wrong mentality. We need to see those things fail in training, in peacetime, so that we can prepare for war.
Great. In your opening statement, you said that if the Defense Department you said the Defense Department need to put serious money into this technology. What do you consider serious money?
I think it would be on the strategic end of serious money. That's how I think about it. And if you look at our strategic capabilities and how much we're spending on we spend billions of dollars on the adaptive engine. We're spending billions of dollars on platforms. We spent $30 billion on the Manhattan Project, built the nuclear bomb, and set the world order in 4 years. Right? This is the type of technology, that autonomy, that AI are, right? Tesla has invested $10 billion into their self-driving. Larry Ellison just last week said, look, to write this new age of large language model algorithms, you need $100 billion to start. We are so far as a department from any number that is close to $1 billion, it pales. I would surmise no more than $100 million is being spent on autonomy technologies writ large in the DoD. And so the number just needs to be higher, more immediately, if you're really talking about getting after strategic technology. And everybody in the DoD has said and acknowledged this is a strategic technology, it's a strategic capability. But if you go back to what I said originally, right, all budget stems from the requirements, and if you don't have people who can write autonomy requirements, then there's not going to be any real budget behind it.
Great. Mr. Sankar, you made reference to the structure. How would you structure the procurement process in the DoD to be more agile and effective?
Thank you. So when I think about my role, even in my own company, the most important thing I'm paying attention to is where are we wrong? How quickly can I catch the error in our roadmaps and our designs and fix that? So how do we institutionalize and reward the sort of defiance that we have from our warfighters on the front lines of what is not working and bring capital and resources and innovation against those problems? That's where I think there's a critical role for the Cocoms and their voice. They are at the front lines. They are thinking through how they're going to fight. They're going through the exercises, and they understand and experience the gaps and the capabilities that are being delivered by the services. How do we provide them the powder they need to go do the experimentation, build the capabilities around that? The amount of innovation in this country, we're unparalleled. The real question is, where have we bestowed monopolies that prevent us from getting after that sort of innovation, from confronting what are we actually wrong about? And I think the greatest missed opportunity with Ukraine is that could have been our Lend-Lease moment. The counterfactual of World War II without Lend-Lease would have been an Axis victory here. We have clear signal that we need to fire up production. We also have clear signal that perhaps many of the things we've built over the last decade will not meet their moment on the modern battlefield. How many DMAG issue papers have come out of what we've been learning from the front lines of Ukraine? We have this sort of generalized attitude of, well, those are two Soviet armies fighting. We would fight differently. Things would be different. All of that is obviously true. But the idea that there wouldn't also be profound lessons to learn from those front lines, I think, is not true.
You really got my attention when you made reference to empowering the Cocoms in your opening statement and just referenced it again there. I really do believe that we should be assigning each Cocom a pot of money that they've got discretion over. They have to answer for it at the end of the year, but they've got complete discretion over. I know I have a figure in my mind. What is a significant figure in your mind that would be a difference maker for the Cocoms to have that kind of empowerment over?
I think something like 2 to 5% of the budget spread across the Cocoms would do a lot. My observation, having done this for 19 years now, is that it's very hard to get a program and a service to wake up every day and say, I got to fight and win against China. They got their program, they got their cost schedule requirements, they've got their team. But it isn't that hard to get them to wake up and say, I've got a PM 2 doors down from me that I need to wake up and kill. The competition within the government is vicious, and we should be leveraging that for productive gains, the incremental delivery of lethality. So I think even just a small amount of budget reallocation of the Cocoms introduces the necessary competitive signal against all of our current other investments, what we're spending the other 95% on, to actually see those things go faster. It introduces why should you adopt commercial technologies that are cheaper and better when you are within your cost schedule performance? Well, you're going to do that if you think the good American 2 doors down from you might do it first and beat you and make your program not as successful as it could otherwise be.
Thank you. We'll recognize the ranking member for his questions.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure about the whole COCOM thing, but that's a whole another. They have their interests in parochial things as well, and I think we need to make sure we set up the Pentagon so that the services are focused in the way that you're talking about. But that's a niche little conversation. It seems to me that we're talking about two different really big things here. One is process. How do we move off of our requirements-based stuck process that just gets you locked into things forever, and move towards, to the point all of you have made, a problem-solving, flexible, adaptive process that can change as it goes. And then the second thing is, even within that, where do we spend the money? And that's a difficult conversation when you're trying to anticipate where things are going. But it seems clear to me that we are spending too much money on legacy systems from, well, to Mr. Valentine's point, in a non-contested world. We're imagining fighting the way we've been fighting in a world that is not as contested when we're moving into a different world. And I would add to one thing you said there, it's not just the great powers. I mean, the frickin' Houthis are able to come up with something. The barriers to entry here have become so low that we're not going to go walking into Afghanistan, right, anywhere in the world where we don't face an adversary that has the capability of shooting down or sinking some of our largest systems. So we need to pivot to that. But focusing on the drone manufacturing issue, because it seems like it's been a number of years now since it's become clear we need to move in that direction, and yet we are not manufacturing any significant numbers of the types of drones that are so critical. So very specifically, and this is for any of you, Mr. Valentine, Mr. Singh, you've talked about it the most, but what do we need to change to start increasing that production capacity and building the number of drones that we really need?
Yeah, thank you, Ranking Member Smith. I think in short, provide a demand signal. With a codified demand signal and knowing that there is a market there, then I think not only Skydio, but drone manufacturers all across the United States can now start to purchase all the long lead items that need
What's
to be.
stopping us from providing that demand signal?
Well, Ranking Member Smith, there are some signals out there, but we hear words and rhetoric, whether they're in the form of replicator, this idea, that idea, but quite frankly,
Well, let me ask you
much of
this,
that come to
and kind of
fruition at this
to
point.
Mr. Rogers' point, and there are reasons that we don't. We give a lot of demand signals, okay, because they're built in for years. But there is a essential contradiction between industry saying you have to give us a demand signal so we know what to build, and, oh, by the way, you have to be flexible and adaptive, all right? Because if we give you a demand signal and then a year into it, we're like, we learned something new. We don't want that anymore. Now we're locked into a contract forever. This is a problem I had. I was very interested in ending the monopoly that ULA had over space launch. Okay, well, we gave ULA a really good demand signal, and to a certain extent, they produced, okay? And it was really expensive, and then we got to the point where we needed to adapt and innovate, and we couldn't because we had 10-year contracts. So how do you balance those two things? Mr. Singh, you seem to have a comment
So,
on that.
you asked the question, what's stopping you? I think the requirements process is what's stopping you. The DoD, to points made earlier, has all the authorities to go fast. So why can't they? Why aren't they? It's because all of their money is already allocated and budgeted for something that has a requirement, which if you have the requirement, then you have fundamentally said, you're not going to innovate anymore. We're just going to fulfill this requirement and execute. If you move to a problem-based system, then that money, you're taking money away from the requirements process and actually focus on.
So what would be the first step? Because I'm very interested in that, and I think most of you at this table have heard me talk about how I'd like to snap my fingers and eliminate half of the requirements, and I don't care which half. Just a good starting point. How would we do that? How would we go in there and say, okay, there's 5,000 pages of requirements, those are in the garbage, solve this problem?
I think I would mandate or I would encourage the DoD that 25% of their acquisition dollars in the next 3 years be spent on a problem-based acquisition system. And from there, what you're going to see is they're going to have to come up with an acquisition system, a problem-based acquisition system, to actually hit that target that you guys set out for them. And what that's going to do is going to shift the flow of money from primarily a requirements-based system, and over time, we can get more to a problem-based system. And are there going to be hiccups? Are there going to be challenges along the way? Yes. Do they hit 20% or 18%? Maybe, but at least we've started that motion of getting them in the right direction.
To the question that I had asked that we moved off of is, how do you balance the need that industry is begging for a demand signal with the flexibility? And Mr. Ludwig, you're shaking your head or nodding your head there, so why don't you take a stab at it?
I think I really want to emphasize that the importance of software and then generally agile methodologies to all of these things. I strongly agree with the remarks from Mr. Sang about a problem-based system being highly advantageous, because in our own work with the Department of Defense, many times we feel somewhat restricted in terms of what we can propose because of the requirements given to us. Whereas if the requirements are more so in a problem statement, we can actually provide a much more comprehensive solution using more creative adaptations of our technologies.
Yeah, makes sense. Doesn't answer my question, though. Mr. Sankar?
If I can offer, so I don't think you need 10-year contracts. When people say demand signal, I think what it comes down to is what is the marginal time and effort it'll take to make a new fiscal purchase. So what's the fiscal OODA loop? Yeah. And private capital will show up if I know, like, look, you can make a buying decision every 2 months.
Right.
I think even 1 year is too latent, too slow. Yeah. So if we can get many more bites at the apple, this is the fiscal version of DevSecOps.
Right. So to some extent, it's less a matter of a demand signal and more a matter of a signal that we will change and you produce something we want, we're going to buy it. Okay, and that's important because I tell you the bigger primes, they like their demand signals too, and what they mean by demand signal is promise us that no matter what for the next 10 years you're going to keep giving us money. Okay, and we've been locked into that in a very crippling way. So I appreciate that distinction. Last question, where is DoD spending money right now that we shouldn't be spending money? Because that's the second part of this. It's a finite amount of money. Okay, you want us to spend all this money on drones. We got the budget we got. We got a $34 trillion debt or deficit, either debt actually. What shouldn't we be spending money on that we're spending it on right now? Mr. Jenkins?
So I thoroughly agree with the requirements argument. One of my favorite sayings is a camel is a horse designed by committee. I think LCS is well described by that. So yeah, precise requirements or lack of requirements and project-based solutions is key. You then have a lot of people making new innovative systems, but do they actually work at scale that we need? Right. So the concept of A bridge fund approach was to give more money for testing prior to end-of-lifing something. So the POM process, zero net sum game, you know something's going to have to go to get something new in. Those officers, those individuals don't have the confidence in the new technology to end-of-life something that's not proven. So run alongside is this next piece. To your question of what can you cut, I think I look at it as how is the spend spread across the DoD. From my perspective, which is at the lower end of the innovation loop, I see a lot spent on R&D innovation. I think the DoD spends $50 billion on innovation and zero on go-to-market. As an example, the Navy spends less than $40 million on fleet integration projects a year. That's 0.01% of the R&D budget. If you're a commercial company, a civilian company, you have a product, you spend some money on R&D, you make a product, then go-to-market strategy, customer testing, innovation testing, supply chain, manufacturing, advertising, marketing, sales. What we do is, as a DoD, as a country, is we spend all the money on R&D and nothing on the go-to-market strategy. If you're Apple, invented a new product, but spent nothing on how to make it, how to ship it, how to sell it, how to market it, and just sat in your hands waiting for orders to come in, you'd have no sales.
I think that's a really good point that I had not heard or thought of that way before.
I think you need to equalize the money between the R&D stage and then the testing and implementation phase before the full-scale operations. And right now, we're just missing that testing and implementation, which is the point of the bridge fund concept.
I'm about out of time here, but Mr. Singh will give you the last word on that question of where we can potentially save money.
If the countermeasure to a system is very cheap, the example being if a $1 million missile can blow up a $400 million ship, or if a $1 million surface-to-air missile can take down a $100 million fighter jet, then we probably want to be buying less of those. And I'm not saying you're getting rid of every single one of them, right? But I'm talking about what the Air Force would call a high-low mix, where you have a few exquisite systems that are augmented by thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of cheaper unmanned systems. And so you just want to move that cost asymmetry advantage to the United States versus where it lies right now, which is with China.
Just to close, being provocative here, we might not need 1,800 F-35s.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I like him. I just want to remind everybody, we're being relaxed on the time, and we're going to remain that way, but we also will have a second round, so if you think of something after your time, we'll come back around. Mr. Gates of Florida is recognized.
Well, I think we're really getting somewhere here. You know, you all have terrifically described the future of warfare, and even a country lawyer can hear what you're saying, that it has to be autonomous. And yet, we are lashed to a present where we are spending billions of dollars on stuff that doesn't work, right? It's not a bug of the system that we're not more rapidly acquiring these technologies. It's a feature of the system. So just for quick math, President Biden requested 68 new F-35s to purchase. Today, in America, 29% of the F-35s are fully operationally capable. Now, I don't know much about warfare like my colleagues, but I do know if something costs $100 million, it should definitely work more than 29% of the time, especially if you're telling us it's the past. So we, I think responsibly as the authorizers, we cut 10 off the block and said you got to make more of these things work. And then the Appropriations Committee not only restored the 10 that we cut, they went and added 10 more. So when you critique our system, Mr. Sang, and didn't allow a vote on the good amendment. So that's what you're up against. What you're up against is a corrupt system where principally 5 companies distribute hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign donations and hire former staffers and hire former lawmakers to be able to influence the process for them. And I bet you didn't have me citing Elizabeth Warren on your bingo card today, but she released a 2003 report entitled Pentagon Alchemy, How Defense Officials Pass Through the Revolving Door and Peddle Brass for Gold. And the key findings of Senator Warren's report are that top defense contractors hire hundreds of former government officials, mostly as lobbyists. The defense industry consolidation increases the risk for big corporations to abuse the powers of the revolving door. And the big defense contractors hired the most revolving door lobbyists and stocked their board with the most former government officials. So to all of you great innovators who are describing the future of warfare to us, do you think it's a fair fight? Like, do you actually think that if you come up with a better mousetrap, that that's going to result in rapid acquisition? Or is it just about who gives out the, let's see, let's see, in the last 2 decades, defense contractors have given out $285 million in campaign contributions and have spent $2.5 billion in lobbying. So you guys think it's fair? Anybody want to take that up? Mr. Jenkins?
I'd say no, it's not a fair playing field by firepower. Small companies like SDrone cannot match the firepower of big primes. I would like to see competition on the battlefield or the pre-battlefield and actually comparing technologies and choosing a winner. As a commercial citizen, we are very competitive, and we're happy to go head-to-head with any other technology to prove that one's better than the other.
No, having a bake-off would be lovely, Mr. Jenkins, but I don't think you're going to get that opportunity based on the rig system we have. And the fact that we're buying 10 more F-35s for billions of dollars that don't work, when Mr. Singh says you guys are spending less than $100 million on that, which is going to win the future on AI and autonomous systems, is the fundamental critique. So the GAO does this big report, and they say, look, we got to have these lobbying reforms where you can't have people rolling right into influencing the very systems that they were a part of, and they apply that to lobbying. And we, to our credit, passed that in the 2018 NDAA. But then DoD started interpreting that to say, well, that's just registered lobbying. That's not acquisition as well. So people engage in the revolving door on acquisition, whereas on lobbying, they're tightening down on that. Does anyone think that we should be more lax on the acquisition revolving door reforms than we are on the lobbying reforms? Does anyone think that? Do any of you challenge the premise that the acquisition process is corrupted when the senior Pentagon officials and the senior generals involved in these programs then go work for the big five companies? Do any of you say, no, that's not corrupt? Any of you? Well, the silence is deafening. The silence is deafening because you all know you're playing a rigged game, and we participated in it, and it's shameful. It should be the very bake-off that Mr. Jenkins is describing. But we'll do all this stuff to learn about all these exquisite technologies, but again, it is not a bug of the system. It is a feature of the system, and it is deeply unpatriotic. A final question for you, Mr. Singh. How much money, you made mention of the amount of U.S. equipment in Ukraine that is not being used on the battlefield because the Ukrainians don't think it works. Do you have an assessment as to how much money that is?
It's in the billions.
In the billions. In the billions. And so U.S. taxpayers are paying for the inflation to send stuff to Ukraine that doesn't even work, and it's magnitudes more than on the stuff we're spending for ourselves that does work. Thank you for your testimony. It's illuminating and enraging all at the same time. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize Mr. Khanna of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having this hearing in Silicon Valley, to you and to the ranking member. And we're in my district, so welcome to both of you and to every member here. It's fantastic. I don't know, Gates quoting Elizabeth Warren, I'm concerned he may be gearing up to run against me here. I hear his wife likes it out in Half Moon Bay, so it's a great district that I hope everyone will get to see. I was struck, Mr. Singh, by your statement, an adversary military with a budget of $25 billion that effectively employs lower-cost drones and autonomy will be able to decimate a military with an $800 billion budget without drones and autonomy. And I guess I'm trying to understand the balance. You know, I actually put into ChatGPT, not that it's authoritative, what would be the top 7 things to fight in China? And swarm drones came out 6th. I'm not saying it's correct, but, you know, F-35s and aircraft carriers and submarines still matter. I mean, it's not like we can just have a military of drones. And yet we need to have some of the new technology to be competitive. And I guess the 2 questions I'd start to ask is, first, we've known on the F-35s, as Mr. Gates and the chairman and others have said, that there have been cost overruns, that they haven't been effective. Do you think any of the technology companies here providing more contracts or competition will do anything to improve the F-35 delivery? Or what do we need to do to improve the traditional platform delivery?
I think the companies here could, in concert, make the F-35 more effective on the battlefield in terms of its employment, but I couldn't speak to how you could increase that 29% fulfillment rate. I don't think that's our company's specialities here.
And there's nothing that any of the new technology companies could do eventually to compete with the primes in terms of, you know, when you say problem solving, my guess is DoD will come back and say, okay, to solve the problem, we still need a lot of legacy traditional platforms. So are you saying here that your value add would be the 20% where they say, yeah, we need swarm drones and other things? Or could you also in any way compete on the 80%? Shyam?
50% of our business is commercial. We help people build planes, trains, automobiles, ships. The largest ship manufacturer in Korea runs on our software. We help GE build the J85 jet engine that goes into the T-38 trainer. We help Anduril build their latest weapon systems. So I think there's a huge amount that Silicon Valley and technologists can do to change production of existing systems here. I think to everything Mr. Gates said, I would agree, but I would also say one of the deeper issues is the dysfunction and pathology of the monopsony. You know, having a buyer that has kind of unilateral control, it doesn't get to benefit from any of the market forces and innovation. You know, in the commercial world, you don't have to be the smartest company. The aggregate signal from all of the companies allows you to innovate and capture things. And so when you have a buyer who has to quote unquote, figure it out all on their own, and then is convinced they can't be wrong, it's quite disastrous. So I think if you think about the F-35, I would love to help with the readiness, the same way that I manage over 65% of the world's air fleet, commercial air fleet. But I don't have access to managing the DoD fleet or helping out in any way, shape, or form. These things are locked up vertically within the prime contractors in their programs. There are different rice bowls here. So I think there's a huge sea change that we could have.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, important at this point, we could maybe pause Mr. Khanna's time, but there is a way to go after the larger systems. The B-21 was built much differently, is being built much differently than the F-35. And part of it was done with other transactional authority, so it skipped a lot of the requirements process, and crucially, it maintained competition within subsystems instead of like what we did with the F-35, where we just gave it to them at the start of the process, so they owned us at that point, vendor lock. So yes, is the answer to your question. Whether you're talking about building an aircraft carrier or a drone, you can do it in a way that maintains competition and gets out of the requirement-based process, which is crucial to your point, because we're going to have to spend money on those things. Thank you. Sorry.
And I just said, and I'll give you the last word, Mr. Ludwig. I think it's important for the tech companies, yes, talk about drones, AIs, but also talk, in my view, about how you're going to make the traditional planes and weapons more competitive, because I don't think you're ever going to convince the American people that we could just have an American military of drones and AI in the next 10 years. Mr. Ludwig.
To Mr. Smith's point on competitive subsystems and to Mr. Khanna's point on F-35 competitiveness, I do want to emphasize especially the capabilities of these companies in supporting extremely advanced software on these systems, right? The next generation of these vehicles in the concept of autonomy, that is mostly software. And in the case of the F-35, that is not a software company, right? The primes are not software companies, and the way that their organizations are structured view software as a cost center, not a profit center, and that means they are not getting the best people from industry in those software teams. The companies here on the panel, we are largely software companies, and we are fighting for the best talent in the market, and we can provide that talent to work on these systems, as an example, adding autonomy capabilities for the F-35.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think, Jim, I want to remind people, I'm not being the usual Mike Rogers who enforces the 5 minutes.
We're so well trained.
That's right. That's right. Mr. Jimenez is recognized.
Thank you very much. You know, Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear submarine force, he was rewarded with his vision by being reassigned and also given an office in a ladies' bathroom. Billy Mitchell, he was rewarded for his vision for air power and the dominance of air power in the future air warfare by being court-martialed. So, you know, I'm wondering if the same kind of mentality still reigns at the DoD, where anybody who dares to challenge the orthodoxy is put away. And so, Mr. Seng, you talked about your AI-powered F-16s, and they did very well. How do they measure up to piloted F-16s in simulated combat?
Win 99.9% of the time, which is the worst it will ever be. So
right, because AI is still in its infancy.
Yes.
So it's just going to get better and better and better. Mm-hmm. So do you believe that's possible that the F-35 could actually be the last manned aircraft
I believe
fighter?
it should be, personally. And I think you can augment it with swarms of unmanned fighter drones, swarms of lower-cost drones. Yes.
And I disagree with the ranking member. I think the American people would welcome our machines fighting for us so we don't lose our young men and women in battle. I'm ready to go there right now, okay? If we actually win the battle.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Just to clarify here, I was talking about how the systems were built, not about whether or not there's a pilot. Okay? You can build a B-21 bomber that's flown autonomously, and I'm fine with that. Okay, so I'm sorry, there's a misunderstanding there. That's not what I'm saying.
I'm
at all.
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you.
That's
I just think we could sell that pretty easily, okay, to the American people. So it's critical. It's critical that we win the race, and we always have the most intelligent artificial intelligence. If that's the way we're going to go, and I think that's the way that we're going to go. Actually, Ukraine is our Spain, right? 1936 Spanish Civil War. It was a proxy war. Germans. Against the Russians, and and then they figured out what the next war was going to be like, and then they kind of adjusted it accordingly. Maybe we didn't. In the United States, it took Pearl Harbor for us to wake up to the fact that we were about to go into war, and that's why we're so far behind. I don't want to be caught like that. Somebody talked to you about the need for drones, and that we could only produce X number of drones per year. What's China's capacity to produce these drones? So, Mr. Valentine.
Yeah, Congressman Jimenez, first off, I trained the human pilot that competed against his AI, so it's probably all my fault that the AI won. But anyway, I don't know the actual capacity that China can put out right now, but I know that they're pumping out at least 10,000 a month, because that's what Ukraine is replenishing their stocks with, and that is just one buyer. They are worldwide. They are subsidized by their government. We at Skydio are ready to compete toe-to-toe with any company in the world, but it's really hard to fight an unfair fight when we're fighting an entire country. But I don't know their actual capacity.
I was saying, in the Black Sea around Ukraine and parts of Russia and all that, are the Ukrainians, I'm not going to say Ukrainian Navy, I'm going to say are Ukrainians having success in denying the Russians access to certain parts of the Black Sea?
I think the Ukrainians are having a number of tactical successes which are leading to strategic dilemmas for the Russian Navy. And their use of drones and low-cost one-way attack drones or one-way missiles, whatever, cheap missiles, whatever you want to call them, have put the Russian Navy to a massive, it's a strategic dilemma for them. That's why why the Ukrainians have sunk so many of their ships. So they say big ships are big targets in Ukraine.
So the Ukrainians must have gobs of submarines and destroyers and frigates and all kinds of stuff, huh?
No.
They don't?
No.
How in the world are they doing this? How in the world are they actually, denying the Russian Navy, which has gobs of submarines and frigates and all kinds of stuff and destroyers and cruisers? How are they doing this?
They are employing asymmetric capabilities that have tremendous tactical advantage. And I want to be clear. I think you need a high-low mix. Again, I'm not for a 100%, at least in the next couple of years, drone military.
I'm not saying you are. I'm just making a point, okay? Because I'm sure that if we asked our military, hey, we want to deny the Russian Navy access or free reign of the Black Sea, they're going to tell us how many nuclear submarines they're going to need in order to go in there to do that, because that's the way they think, all right? And if they want to do X, Y, Z, how we have to ship a carrier task force, over there, which I think, I've said it many times, we have way too many eggs in too few baskets, because they don't think differently. I would rather see us disperse our assets so that when one ship is sunk, the entire battle group is actually useless, and 85 airplanes go down with it. I'm intrigued by the testimony. I believe that the problem lies. There's a two-pronged problem. It's in DOD, it's in the Pentagon, and it's in us, right here, all right? Because of us, we foster that culture, that risk-averse culture. the ones that wants to go to what's tried and proven, and I'll be promoted, if I don't rock the boat. All right, and so I guess I'm over. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for not shutting me down, and I guess I'll have a second round at it. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from Florida. Now, Chair now recognizes another local Californian, Ms. Jacobs.
Yes, though I am from the other side of the state. Although Mr. Singh failed to mention the most important part of his company when he was doing his intro, which is it is headquartered in the best congressional district. First, thank you all. I wanted to ask you, you've all sort of talked in various ways about how to change the way we do contracting and procurement, getting more towards this problem-based approach. There have been a few of these different initiatives that have already been coming out of DoD, and I just wanted to get your all's take on if you feel like they're going in the right direction, if you feel like they've helped. So first I want to ask about Replicator. Do you believe Replicator has provided the sufficient clarity on its objectives and plans for companies particularly ones who are potentially less familiar with the way a DoD generally works? And just how do you feel the Replicator program has been going so far for any of you who want to answer?
I can talk briefly to that. So SDrone is not a part of Replicator. They have a very, very narrow focus on kinetic explosive devices for a particular fight near Taiwan. So it's I'm not saying it's a wrong mission, I'm just saying it's very unique and very narrow. So it doesn't go much further than that. I don't think anyone on this panel is actually involved with Replicator, I'm guessing, significantly because of that very narrow focus. My point is that there's many more challenges we face around the world that have a very different set of requirements to the Taiwan Strait challenge. So,
but would you use the way you do Replicator as a model to say, like, okay, this is another challenge, but would you advocate doing similar to Replicator for that challenge as well?
It's great to see pace. Speed is very good. But unless there's recurring program money to take that on and back it up, it's going to be wasted because it's a small blip, not a long continuing story. The other thing we're seeing, my counterparts in Ukraine that I'm talking to, they're telling me there's a 6-week cadence of having a new solution to that solution being redundant because it's got a countermeasure. So we have to be very, very careful when we buy things en masse that they're actually going to even work when they're fielded, if they're fielded. So it could be a very, very large number spent on something which never actually gets deployed.
Got it.
Yeah, Congresswoman, I think of replicators two things. And on one side, it is a strategic concept. And as a strategic concept, I think it is actually a seed of getting to this idea of problem-based acquisition that I think we are all seeking. And of that, this idea of a future battlefield that has thousands, hundreds of thousands of autonomous systems supporting a smaller number of humans, I think is absolutely the right way to go. The second part of Replicator is that of an acquisition program, and there I don't think that the action has met the rhetoric. So I think the seed is there to create this idea of a problem-based acquisition system, but what we've actually done to date on the acquisition side, I don't think has lived up to that.
Got it. And then, over the last 5 years, we've seen a number of different defense innovation organizations across OSD and the different services. How have you guys felt those have worked? Is it too many? Is it not enough? Have you gotten what you need? All of that.
Ma'am, I think all those programs, all those institutions, they're Band-Aids. They're Band-Aids that don't address the root cause of the problem, which is the root cause of the problem is all the money in the DoD goes to the things that are requirements. And so the Band-Aids are nice, right? If you're bleeding out and, you want a Band-Aid there pretty immediately. But if you have a cancer, you need to tackle the internal cancer if you want real fundamental institutional change.
Got it. Thank you. And then I wanted to ask you, to me, one of the things that we're really struggling with is that if you look at a lot of the innovation in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was a lot of research and technology that government or DoD initially funded and then spun out commercially. Now we're in a world where most of the innovation and research is actually commercially funded, and then we're trying to figure out how to spin it back into DoD, which is a slightly different problem set than the way the system is currently set up. And I guess one of the ways, if you guys have thoughts on, like, part of what's hard about that is that, for instance, the accuracy level you need on AI for something commercial is very different than the accuracy level you need if you're using an AI technology to do a kinetic strike, right? Because then we need like 100% accuracy. We don't really have a lot of room for error in a way that you might in a commercial system. So how should we be thinking about the way then to take commercially produced innovations and figure out how to bring them into DoD, which is a completely different problem set than the way most of these acquisition processes have been designed?
I think the software acquisition pathway is a very powerful tool. I think it has not been used much so far, and it should be used much more. With regards to the relevance of commercial technologies for DoD, right, in our own business, we do a lot of work with autonomous cars, and so you actually do deal with many of the same types of challenges that you would deal with in a defense context. Like it's unacceptable for a car to hit a pedestrian, but those same types of technologies are also used in many types of weapon systems. But we highly encourage the use of the software acquisitions pathway, and using that mechanism actually with groups like the DIU has been quite beneficial to us.
The last question I have is it's somewhat around some of the language that is in this year's NDA, but more broadly about how do we think about the sort of balance between making sure you guys have your proprietary stuff, but then making sure DoD can, for instance, repair. We've got some right to repair language in this year's NDA, can actually provide oversight. So like how should we be thinking about that question of like how much we can let you guys have a black box versus the need for us to be able to repair or do oversight or make sure that things from different companies are actually able to operate together?
To address this from the software perspective, people tend to think about vendor lock. Any decision my engineers make, they're locking me into that technology. The real question is not, do I face vendor lock in my own software stack? It's, what is the switching cost? If the switching cost is 2 days, I really don't care. They can go forth and make whatever decisions they'd like. If it's 2 decades, I care a lot. I'm going to have a huge amount of scrutiny over the technical decisions they're making and the implications of that. And I think if we could just own it. So in particular, a lot of the time the DoD says, well, I want to avoid vendor lock, so I'm going to build it myself. They're just locking themselves into this Galapagos island that doesn't benefit from any commercial innovation or R&D. They're not going to be able to outspend the commercial world. But instead, if we started thinking about strategically, where do we have vendor lock that has unacceptable switching costs, we can bring market forces to that. Why does the commercial world not face this? Because the incentive for every company is to compete based on switching costs. So people invest in making that possible. And I think a similar approach is very, very possible within DoD.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra 2 minutes. I'm getting spoiled over here. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Mace of South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here this morning and briefing us. Mr. Singh, you mentioned GPS a couple times in your testimony and answers. How do we address the GPS issue? How would you solve that problem?
I think about, one, putting ourselves in real relevant battlefield conditions in training, right? In the SEAL teams and in the entire military, we say, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in war, and that's 100% true. It is very disappointing. I think I can count probably on one hand, maybe on two, but I'm pretty sure on one hand, the amount of actual relevant electronic warfare pre-deployment workups that our troops go through. They are simply not experiencing the problem. They do not know what will work or what doesn't work when it comes time to deploy, and that's something that I think needs to be changed immediately.
But also in terms of GPS, I mean, China's trying to hack our GPS systems. Like, what is the future? What do we utilize? How do we get away from GPS, I guess, is where I was trying to go with that.
Yeah, I think you have to build systems that are completely non-reliant on it. It is not going to be a reliable support mechanism on the battlefield. In humans, right, we, in the SEAL teams, fighter pilots, you learn to navigate without GPS, right? But obviously for the weapon systems that have been proliferated, these surface-to-air missiles.
If you're flying a C-17.
Right, you don't want to go up against a surface-to-air missile system, right? And so you need to build systems that fundamentally don't rely on GPS.
Mr. Valentine, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, Ms. Mace, the way we've attacked that, we fundamentally believe that AI, which many of the companies at this table represent, is the antidote to GPS jamming. and the GPS spoofing.
I
So the
agree.
way we have done that is we have taken navigation cameras that were designed to prevent the drone from running into things and realized that we can use those to do a visual-based navigation system. Much like an old Tomahawk would navigate by comparing two pictures, realizing that, oh, I should be here, but I'm here, and then doing some trigonometry. We're kind of doing the same thing, but we're doing it roughly 60 times a second through about 8 neural networks. And so it's much more accurate, and we've seen great success with that to the point where after a 40-minute flight of jamming against GPS and active spoofing with no GPS, our drone, by the way, in the rain in Ukraine, came back and landed about 20 feet from where the operator was. So that was pretty impressive. So we fundamentally think that the technologies that we represent at this table will ultimately solve that GPS challenge.
Mr. Ludwig.
I'd really like to emphasize that this is a software problem, not a hardware problem. We have software-defined radios today. We also have very sophisticated test infrastructure for being able to test these things. I think especially when we talk about a system like GPS, we think of it as satellites and electromagnetic waves. Fundamentally, though, the way that these autonomy systems work in the presence of electromagnetic interference is very sophisticated software, which gets back to this splitting the software and the hardware components and the importance I think that has for the DoD.
Okay, and then you mentioned too, Mr. Ludwig, since you got the microphone, in your testimony about China leapfrogging the U.S. in terms of autonomy. When will they leapfrog us on autonomy?
I think this has already happened. A group of our leadership team earlier this year was at the Beijing International Auto Show, and we got to test drive the latest commercially available Chinese vehicles, literally going to dealerships in China and trying those systems. And I think it's fair to say that the Tesla autopilot system is actually not competitive compared to the things that we saw in China. Some of the most impressive technologies coming directly from Huawei, in fact.
Okay, and then in terms of technology and AI, when does China leapfrog the U.S.?
I think that's harder to say, but I think it is important to note that the innovation is very vibrant in China. The most recent CVPR conference, which is the world-leading computer vision conference, had more submissions from Chinese researchers than any other nationality. And so the amount of innovation that's happening in China is really quite incredible, and we should take it very seriously.
Okay, and then speaking of innovation, and I agree with everything, just about everything that's been said today. I mean, we have created a bureaucracy. It takes a really long time. Things are changing so rapidly, and you guys have testified today on how quickly the technology and the capabilities of your technology are changing as well. Short of World War III, which nobody in here wants, we always want to avoid that. What do we need to do? How do we force innovation? How do we force ourselves to be more nimble? Understanding that we're not going to get this massive overhaul. I agree with you on the problem-solving acquisition sort of process. That's very private sector. That's not the environment that we have right now. So given the chessboard that we have our pawns on, that the chips are on, what small parts will make a big difference? What are some small things we can do now to be more innovative, to be faster, to be more nimble? As you all say, that pieces are in place, but we're just not doing it. Personnel could be the answer. It could be technology, but how do we incentivize? And I've seen some really crazy things. I had a hearing, I think it was earlier this year or last year. It was like $300 million spent on a software system by DoD. Never got implemented because none of the service branches were ready for implementation. We basically poured gasoline on $300 million and let them match. Just never, so how do we avoid that? What is the answer here? What can we do now in the next 12 months with the regulatory environment, the acquisition environment we have? What can we do now to make a bigger difference? Mr. Sanker.
I go back to the submarine-launched ballistic missile. When Admiral Rayburn was developing that in the 60s, we had 4 competing programs going on simultaneously. I think the root cause for the lack of innovation is that when you have a single source that gets to decide whether they want the innovation or not, they don't. There has to be something worse than change, which is irrelevance, in order to get people to adopt and change faster. So I think we need more competing initiatives. We struggle for a lack of competition inside of government. We're often trying to externalize that competition to the companies, but that's not the root cause of the issue. This is why I think empowering the Cocoms does matter, because it provides incremental signal on different needs and incentives of where to go that forces services to react to those
But how do we break up
needs.
those monopolies? How do we break it up? what can we do now in terms of the process, the environment we have today?
I think a very tactical solution is every program that's a major program should have multiple competing PMs. When we were going through the Titan program with the Army, there was one PM who was overseeing the competition between Raytheon and Palantir. Maybe we should have two PMs, one attached to Palantir, one attached to Raytheon. And those PMs wake up every day trying to win, trying to beat each other. It provides incentive on the margin to adopt new technologies, to go faster, to trade off small R requirements, use human judgment to see what's going to happen. And that then puts natural weight into the COCOM command. What does General Flynn in the Pacific think he wants? Does he want this Titan or that Titan? And how do we get into constant iterative cycles? I think it provides the right basis. It starts to approximate what commercial competition looks like.
And then if everyone else, we'll start over here with Mr. Valentine and we'll go through the table.
I agree with Mr. Sankar. Competition is an incredibly important part of this. I also think personnel, that is a big part of it. There are several programs the department already runs where they do fellowships with private sector companies so that program managers, so that military officers can start to understand what it means to actually innovate. I think we should fund those and send more people to them.
Mr. Singh.
I think you can create emergencies around the problem. I think everybody in the DoD, I think leaders in Congress recognize the state of our national security, the state of our technological edge is in an emergency situation. I say emergency because I think Congress and the DoD does a very good job when an emergency has been declared, right? And that's when, for whatever reason, we all get the most bang for our buck as taxpayers. That's what I think about. You can create these mini competitive Manhattan projects where you are funding a handful of these efforts to create these capabilities and technologies, but there has to be a sense of urgency behind it. There has to be a recognition that we're in a very challenging situation.
Mr. Ludwig.
I would just underline that I really do feel the primary innovation looking forward to the next century is going to be in software innovation. And so right now, matter of fact, the DoD does not purchase much software. And I think that in order to unlock that huge amount of innovation in software, there just have to be more mechanisms to more iteratively and more quickly procure software.
Mr. Jenkins.
For me, it's all about incentivization. How do you incentivize companies to innovate competitively amongst each other? Then how do you incentivize budget creators to be bold in what they're choosing? If you can do those two things, there's a huge amount of private capital, as this panel demonstrates, that can put their power to bear on the solutions. But if there's no pathway, no roadmap to get to the end goal, it's not going to happen. So incentivize private companies, incentivize government to choose the right products.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Veazey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panelists for being here today. Mrs. Singh, I wanted to specifically ask you about the VBAT. And I know that you said that they may not directly fit in with the Air Force's collaborative combat aircraft program, which focuses on AI-piloted jets working alongside crews like in the F-35, for instance. And so I wanted you to elaborate on that a bit and just explain how these VBAT teams could potentially be integrated with such a program in the future, and what are some key considerations for making such integration successful?
Absolutely. The VBAT at its core, the problem it's solving is that of a targeting problem. You need long endurance, you need long duration to actually target assets on the battlefield. We learned this very well during the global war on terror. And we utilized a wide array of drones to execute these targeting cycles. And so the VBAT is a platform that is really a next generation targeting platform that is meant to solve that targeting problem. The Air Force CCA program is it's an air dominance, air superiority program of record that looks to solve the problem. How can we establish air superiority? And so these two things are in concert when I think about them. Where you would say, the CCAs that are being contemplated are primarily strike platforms. Well, what the VBAT does is it provides targets for those platforms to strike.
Okay. So given that the Air Force's focus is on developing these AI-piloted jets, how could a VBAT, because I know the F-35 has come up, how can VBAT teams be complementary to F-35s, and how can Shield AI's technology enhance the effectiveness of F-35 in joint operations?
Yeah. A handful of ways. The VBATs themselves, they can forward deploy. They're highly mobile. You don't need runways to launch out of them. They're logistically simple. And so you want to start creating that targeting picture well ahead of the utilization of any long-range, strike assets, whether they're missiles, whether they're fighter jets. You need the targeting picture first. In the SEAL teams, in Special Operations Command, it was driven to our head that 99% of what we do was intelligence operations, 1% is the kinetic piece. Obviously a very important piece, but you have to know what you're going to hit, when you're going to hit it, how you're going to hit it, and that's the targeting picture that the U.S. has become, best in the world, premier at doing it. VBAT's well out ahead. I'm talking days, weeks, months ahead. Creating that targeting picture is how I contemplate in these electronically warfare contested environments. While GPS is being jammed, while communications is being jammed, is the role that it plays directly into our air superiority mission with a joint strike fighter, with a CCA, et cetera.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And Mrs. Sankar, you said something that stuck out a little bit for me. I know that in order to make all of these changes and to be able to improve these procurement processes that you talked a lot about in your testimony, to me it sounds like that's obviously going to take resources to be able to do that. And I know that also there seems to be a bullishness, not just on the panel, but for the American public to see more of these drone type capabilities, these things that don't require as much human risk involved. And of course we hear that a lot from our constituents. But being able to do that, it seems like it would take like a generational investment to be able to do it. It just doesn't happen overnight. If you think about what this country did in the 1980s, we spent a lot of money in order to create this perception that the U.S. was the biggest military power in the world, and we were. Not only did we spend money domestically at our defense plants, but we put forward bases around the country. Do you think that that we're able to do all of these things that you would like to do without spending much more than we already do? And also, do you think that just having these more AI type capabilities, or planes that don't have pilots, that's going to really be enough in order to deter war? Because on this panel, that should be the first thing that we work on. I know that obviously we want to make sure that we are being competitive with the Chinese, but we obviously want to have the perception and have enough military might and muscle and have other people see that we do in order to deter war. And so does that do that?
I absolutely, you could say that we're spending at historic lows as a percentage of GDP relative to what we have in the past. But I do actually think that the primary issue is of asset allocation. If we said we have the budget we have, are we allocating it to maximize our lethality? I think the answer is no there. And I think a big part of that is how much innovation are we able to benefit from. This decoupling of the commercial world from the defense world is very profound. When at the beginning of World War II, when the U.S. Army went to Pontiac and asked them to start making anti-aircraft guns, the U.S. Army's production time per unit was 3.5 hours. For Pontiac, it was 15 minutes. Why was it 15 minutes? Is it because they're smarter? No, it's because they had so much experience making cars that they were able to transfer laterally here. Only 30 to 40% of Chinese prime's revenue comes from the PLA. So that cheap toaster your neighbor is buying on Amazon is subsidizing lethality against U.S. service members. This is why it is such a profound problem that 86% of defense spending goes to defense-specific companies that have no ability to benefit or amortize or learn any lessons from the broader commercial market. This is a challenge for us here. Actually, sorry, it's 94%. And it didn't used to be that way. This is a consequence of winning the Cold War. When we were competing, trying to win the Cold War, we had this diversified industrial base. Why is that important? Today, it's very hard for me to compete on price. I would love to go to existing programs and say, I can do this at half the price. absolutely no one is interested in that proposition, which is crazy because that's exactly how I built my commercial business. I go to companies and compete on price. So how do we create that mechanism? One of the reasons that's incredibly difficult is we have this fixation on the cost type contracting. I want to pay you for what it costs. Well, I want to spend billions of dollars to create technologies that mean I can deliver for you at half the price. I can do that because I'm going to have twice the margin. And so we need to move to a value measurement. What is the government getting for this, as opposed to what did it cost me to build the thing? And by doing that, you're going to liberate massive amounts of the budget to reinvest in the capabilities that drive incremental lethality. Unfortunately, that is what our competitor is doing. We have no time to waste on that.
Chair, now recognize the gentlelady from Virginia.
Thank you,
Ms. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've talked a lot about drones and innovation in modern warfare today, and much like machine guns in World War I, small drones have emerged as a new staple of the modern battlefield. This is demonstrated by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, where drones are used in a wide range of applicability, ranging from FPV drones being utilized in kamikaze strikes or larger quadcopter drones being used for ISR applications. Interestingly, NATO recently reported that 2/3 of all Russian vehicle losses in the conflict have been a result of Ukraine's employment of FPV kamikaze drones. I know that that you all are probably watching just some of the challenges that Congress has had with Ukraine aid and funding, and also just listening to you all talk about how the DoD budget and acquisition process has just really stifled your ability to develop new technologies. So could you address for me just how impactful that Ukraine aid piece was for your companies, for your business, improving your business models, expanding your portfolios, and just developing new technology?
For me, for us, we've gotten zero resource from the Ukraine aid that has been given. We've been on the ground there since May of 2022. We have a full office in Kyiv. We were out forward. We're there at our own expense to learn. And the rate of learning there far exceeds what we're often able to learn in any other theater that we're at. Now, the Europeans have contributed resources, but I think it is kind of a shocking statement that we have not had any contributions from the resources that have been given to the Ukrainians.
Congresswoman, also of the roughly 1,000 systems we have in Ukraine right now, I think the vast majority of them were either donated by us or were purchased by the donor community at the beginning of the conflict. So I can't directly trace any of the Ukraine funding to supplying systems from our company, at least, to Ukraine. But I can absolutely tell you the need is there. They have the need, they have the will, and they have the capability to use this, as you mentioned, to a tactical and strategic advantage. At this point, they just need the stuff delivered.
Thank you. So, and clearly smaller drones are here to stay, and the DoD needs to examine ways it can strengthen the supply chain of domestically produced drones. So, Mr. Valentine, can you tell me what ways the DoD can help to foster a strong domestic supply chain of smaller drones?
Yes, Congresswoman. Again, this comes back to when we start to buy things consistently, and I think Mr. Singh actually said it correctly, and Ranking Member Smith as well. This isn't give us a contract for 10 years, but if we can demonstrate that we have a consistent set of small bites at the apple, and we will iterate and deliver whatever capability you need, but once that is demonstrated, now we have the essential buying signal we need to go and buy all the constituent parts. There are things that take a long time to get. Sometimes those things could take 4 months, which has led to this idea, at least that I've started to think about, around stockpiling, so that we have some tremendous demand shock. We can flash the systems with whatever the latest software build is and get them out the door to be able to respond to that demand shock. And then the only other thing that I would mention are chips are always an issue. The more that we can bring that chip-making capability, at least to friendly countries, ones that we have access to during a time of conflict, I think that is supremely important.
And Mr. Singh and Mr. Sankar, you guys talked about just the moving from requirements-based to, well, Mr. Singh did, moving from requirements-based to problem-based, acquisition process. And so I'm just curious, how do you all, as software companies, work with the primes to integrate the latest and best technology, and then how do you work with the warfighter to actually hear from them what they need?
Yeah, we work with the primes every single day, and it comes to actually a lot of people's recognition, the primes' recognition, the warfighters' recognition that the best way to solve this problem is with this software-first mentality, things that both my, all my colleagues here have referenced. And the way that we, hear from them, work with them, no different than any commercial company. You go out, you find your customers, you talk to them, you aggregate as much input as possible. You filter out the noise. You see, you recognize what makes sense, which is standard best product management practice at any Fortune 500 company. That's the model that we take, and yeah.
And I would just add to that, we ship out 90,000 software upgrades to our fleet a week. One of the really interesting lessons for me during the Afghan NEO was that usually in a crisis, when something happens, the old mentality is that you freeze things. The change seems risky. But actually in the crisis, we accelerated the amount of change that was happening. We pushed out more than 90,000 upgrades a week because it enabled us to be responsive. Software became the most malleable weapon system. So I can't understate the importance of being out there with the warfighters, getting each incremental piece of feedback, and then closing those code chains. We spend a lot of time talking about kill chains. If you want to close kill chains, you need to close the code chains as quickly as possible.
Is there a way that Congress can intervene to improve that process of communication between the warfighter, or do you feel pretty good about that then?
I'd come back to my suggestion of giving more authority and voice to the Cocoms. That's where the need really is, and that's going to drive the speed of these code chains.
And out of curiosity, what do you speak to the pilots out there? You're talking this is the pilot end of the table, and just about this progression of making us just not relevant anymore. And do they recognize that? How do they feel about that?
They feel good about it. I tell people, look, being a Navy SEAL is really cool until you're asked to fight inside a tunnel system, right? Where attrition rates, casualty rates are 80+%. Being a pilot is really, really cool until you're going up against an integrated surface-to-air missile system where you have a 0.1% chance of survival. That is not a mission I want any of our pilots ever to take.
Agree with you. As a mother of a future naval aviator, agree 100%. Thank you very much. And I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure AI will never be able to duplicate our good-looking pilots on the beach, which is really important for movies. I'm really enjoying this. This is the first field hearing I've ever participated in. This is fantastic. It's a fantastic panel, a very fascinating topic that really is maybe one of the more important germane topics for what we need to conquer in the near future, because it will affect our readiness for our men and women and also for our great country, because let's face it, we don't have enough qualified people out there to even man the 17 naval vessels that can't be deployed this year, because we have an undermanning process. The more automated we become, the fewer people get killed. The better we do our process, the less we spend on recruiting instead of R&D. I think this is a fantastic topic. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for doing this for us. And thank you to the panel for taking time from your very important responsibilities for doing this, because I love this. I love the idea of the first breakfast. I thought that was just a spot on. I might actually watch this hearing over again just because I'm learning so much after all of you speaking. In medicine, we've also had that same resistance to change. So I'm not just a pilot, I'm an ER doc in case you ever want to know if there's a Marine in the room or a pilot in the room. How do you know? They'll tell you, right? But in medicine, we resist change too. At one time, it was considered a great thing to have dirt all over your jacket so you know how salty you were. And they actually made fun of people like Dr. Lister, who wanted to use antiseptic, or somebody who actually wanted to wash their hands in between surgeries. We resist change, even when it's a very good thing for the future. As a matter of fact, we demonize people, as we've pointed out, for people who have done the right thing in the military and in medicine and everything else like that. We always resist change, but thank God for change, because that's what's going to keep us relevant into the next generation of weapon systems. I was kind of trying to figure out who is more answerable to what we're actually talking about today. Are we answering to you, or are you answering to us as far as how do we change this? Because ultimately we are the people who are going to be the instrument to changing how this process works so that you can do your job better, but ultimately we're answerable to the people of the United States, because we're taking their money and funding it. Which brings up an interesting point. This is the first time, maybe since Roman history, where you have individuals that are as powerful, maybe even more powerful than the government. You remember Pompey, you could raise his own army, he could fund his own consulship. Those days have been gone for a long time ago. It used to be that United States and Russia were the only two countries that could put people up in outer space. Now you have an individual who could put more spaceships up in outer space than the entire American government. Times have changed. 75% of our government is spent on welfare programs. Another 10%, we argue all of our non-discretionary spending is what we spend everything else on, and we think that those are the powerful committees. Whereas I would say that the last bastion of hope for America and its progress in technologies really is right here in this room. The Armed Services Committee is the only real investor in progress in technology, if you think about it. $800 billion is being spent, not all of it in the advancements as we're talking about. We waste a lot of money. But if you think about it, what else do we invest in anymore? We don't. The American government's not good at investing. We need this hand-in-hand attitude where we actually have corporations doing the hard work for us so you can make a profit, but we can benefit. Because let's face it, NASA's not the one going up to outer space to rescue people from a space station that's 30, 40 years old. That's where we're at. That's the reality of where we're at right now. So really excited about what you guys bring, especially when we look to the future of budgeting. You talked about stockpiling. It worries me a little bit because I agree with the chair. You become antiquated very quickly. We watch this in our weapon systems even now, and you talk about, not to pick on F-16 pilots or F-16s in general, but it struck me as curious that Ukraine even wants them when you consider about the future of warfare and what you can do against an F-16, and you only have a few compared to the SAMs and everything else that you have in Russia. Why are we even bothering with that technology? Let's stick to the more advanced technologies, which also worries me about the future of countermeasures, where you have Iran and China supplying our enemies with very cheap, technologically advanced weaponry. And yeah, the Kill Chain book alluded to this, and we've been briefed on it, right? How we're countering those measures. But here's my first question to you guys is, how do we come up with new technologies to counter these drones that are going to come after us and our legacy systems? And I think we do need carriers. But I'm worried about what do we need to be investing in to counter the measures that we're actually developing from Iran and China and things that are going to protect our larger systems. And I'll start with the first. I just love the first breakfast comment, so we'll start with you, Mr. Sanko.
Well, thank you. I'll say when we talk about stockpiling, we tend to focus on the stock and the pile, but what really matters is your ability to produce the stock. Innovation is a consequence of productivity. When you don't produce, you can't innovate on what it is that you're producing. So we have to be thinking about, what are we buying here? We're not actually buying the end product that you're then going to stockpile, because you're right, there's an ephemeris component to that. You're actually keeping alive the knowledge and the innovation cycle. You're funding the OODA loop. And I think that's a critical part of how are we going to counteract these capabilities, because it's not it's a moving part itself. Like, as we counteract, they're going to counteract again, and we have to stay on top of that. So I think the broad set of investments comes down to the need to produce at enough scale and fast so that we can keep innovating on what it is that we're producing.
And Mr. Singh, did I hear that you? I mean, we talked about the legacy systems. We talked about different things we use that aren't effective in Ukraine. Did I actually hear you say that the HIMARS were not a good weapon in Ukraine?
GPS-guided rounds. Okay. There are certain rounds, again, it's a mix of some things that work and some things that don't, and if it has GPS, it's got a very, 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 very low success rate.
Okay, and I understand, I've heard from different companies that we're not delivering the weapons that we actually have stockpiled in America to the Ukraine basin, and I'm not sure if that's due to purchasing or delivery problems or regulations. What's the biggest problem in our deliverable? Because we have the weapons that we're not giving to them that they could use in the battlefield that are the most effective weapons I've seen. You could talk about switchblades, you could talk about any sort of drones, you could talk about all kinds of different things, but why are we not delivering? Is it the purchasing problem or is it the delivery?
It's probably a combination of both. There's a lot of noise coming out of Ukraine. There's certainly a bureaucracy going through that process right now in terms of the foreign aid process. That's something that our company is going through right now with the Ukrainians hand in hand. And then certainly also when you talk about the delivery mechanism, again, the Ukrainians they force companies to come to the front line now and work alongside them as they use their product. And this is a very hard thing. It's a very expensive thing to do as a company, but I give them all the credit in the world because they simply don't want things that are not going to work on the battlefield. And so while there is a lot of noise in this space, I think you see if it's not on a buy list from the Ukrainians, there's a good chance they just haven't tested it, or they've tested it and it's not being successful, period.
And then final question to Mr. Ludwig, you mentioned the importance of software. When we talk about investing in the future, whether it be software or hardware, the difference between quantum, AI, and autonomous, those three things all kind of combine into one system sometimes, and if we get those all together, man, it's going to change the world. And of course, that's why it's really important to develop these hand in hand. I don't know if you think that we're going to be able to, is it realistic that in the next couple of years we'll be able to integrate those three things in a realistic way that's going to affect shape the battlefield?
Well, certainly AI and autonomy, these things are deeply intertwined, and those fields are evolving at a rapid pace. Quantum still exists more on the research boundaries. The primary promise of quantum is the ability to more easily crack cryptography standards. And if a country does have the ability to crack all cryptography standards, that is a game-changing capability. But that is more in the research phases today. I really want to underline, though, just how quickly AI and autonomy are advancing, and again, how little, frankly, focus there is on this generally at the department. We're generally talking about talking about systems like a plane or a boat, and not talking about the advanced software capabilities that are required to actually make that effective in the modern war.
Thank you. With that, I yield, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. I wanted to ask, you talked about the tests and seeing how things work in Ukraine. Have any of you had difficulty in being able to sell to Ukraine? Any restrictions put on your ability to sell by our government? Mr. Valentine.
Congressman, we do have issues getting systems in the country. Many of our systems that have thermal cameras they're not ITAR, but they are BIS controlled. Getting those export licenses can be a challenge, especially when that export license process starts with getting an end user to certify, here's me, here's my address, and I need X number of these things. That's pretty challenging to get from a platoon of soldiers in Ukraine, even working through the Ministry of Defense. So that can be somewhat challenging.
I'll just say there's not a fundamental limiting, the export regulations have been solid. Yes, you have to go through a license process, but it hasn't been a limiting factor in terms of getting capabilities over there.
Good. Mr. Ludwig, you made reference to the DIU hedge fund needs to be fully funded. Well, how much is it being funded? I'm skinning my ignorance. I don't know.
I would actually have to ask my team for the precise number. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'd like to know what fully funded is for that hedge fund. And you also made reference to the software acquisition process. Is it different from this requirements-based acquisition process we've been talking about?
Mainly, I'm referring to the splitting of procuring software from hardware. And so oftentimes, software is thought of as let's say, the thing that you do after you've thought of the hardware system. And what this does is this forces many hardware companies to think about software as a cost center rather than a profit center. And in the reality of the talent in software, it's extremely competitive. And oftentimes it's very difficult to hire the talent that's required to build these most advanced systems if you're thinking of this as a cost center.
Mr. Zing, a couple of things you said I think are big takeaways from today. One is the requirements-based system is a cancer. I like that. It's very easy to understand. And another was that we should dedicate 20 to 25% of the acquisition budget to a problems-based system as opposed to a requirements-based system. Give me another thing that you think this committee should take away from this committee, other than this hearing, other than those two principles.
Those are very, very top of my list, so I'm glad that would be your number one. Behind that, I think it's about really being customer-centric, warfighter-centric here. Again, whether it's going to the Cocoms, as my colleague Sham talked about, or increasing the amount of reality in training on the battlefield. And that to me is what's nearest and dearest, because I have friends, I have teammates who are preparing for deployment, and you ask them, are you going up against what the battlefield's going to look like, the electronic warfare battlefield? And they tell me, they're like, no, we're still preparing in the same way we prepared for Iraq, for Afghanistan. And that to me that's a heartbreaking thing, because I think we owe it to them to actually prepare them and train them for what the conflict will actually be like.
Great. Mr. Sankar, you've had a lot of very thoughtful suggestions in here. I'm really impressed with your thought process on this. The Defense Department is made up of a lot of very patriotic Americans who love this country and want to help us be successful. It is also the largest organization on the planet and culturally very indoctrinated. And it's been my experience in 22 years on this committee that it does not change unless it's forced to change. I offer that as the backdrop to this question. Do you have some statutory suggestions that you think that Congress should consider imposing on the department to bring about the kind of changes you think are important?
All my suggestions come around to the idea of increasing the amount of competition within the department across programs. So ideas like competing program managers, competing PMs to go after this, to create the right incentives to adopt innovative approaches that shave time off schedule, that provide lower cost options. I think we do need a little more crazy. I think Congress, in the Rickover story, Congress doesn't probably get as much credit as it needs for how much protection it, Zumwalt said the Navy has 3 enemies: the Soviet Union, the Air Force, and Hyman Rickover. And you can think about how important the role Congress played was there. I think we should recognize that we have uniquely talented people in the service, and there's probably a role for some DOTMA reform here. The idea that people have to keep moving every 3 to 4 years, even though they might be the most uniquely suited person to carry some of these roles forward, is a challenge. It's not how we would operate in the private sector, right? When you get some projects can only be done by a certain set of humans, and you have to wrap yourself around them and make everything happen as a consequence of that. So I think that's pretty important. And then we should probably be more open. Andy Grove had a saying: first you got to let chaos reign, then you reign in chaos. We have very low tolerance in the department for letting chaos reign. It's okay for it to be confusing what's happening with Replicator. My question actually be, maybe it should be more confusing. Maybe we need 2 or 3 replicators happening at the same time to create the necessary sort of incentives here. I think space is one of the most innovative areas because, frankly, it's a bit of a food fight between NRO, NGA, Space Force, Spacecom, and that's increasing our lethality. So you could look at that and say, oh, this looks like a bug. I see it as a huge feature. We're going to be better off because of it. What are the other areas where we don't have enough of that? Is Ukraine's idea on unmanned service crazy? It's not even about whether the unmanned service is going to work. Does it provide the necessary incentive for everyone else to adapt around that? Does it provide the reason, as you said, for them to change?
Well, I would make reference to what the ranking member said earlier, and that is this committee in the last 10, 12 years has given the department all sort of authorities. They won't use them. So I would urge y'all and your counterparts who are not necessarily witnesses here today but are paying attention to this, come to us with specific statutory language that you think will have a forcing function. We are all ears. We want to get it from you, but you're the folks to interact with them. You're the best person to give us that language. And I would end my comments with what I think is the most important thing that you've said here, Mr. Sankar, and that is we are spending on defense at historic lows as a percentage of our GDP. That is a fact. For over a century, the last 3 years has been the lowest spending on defense as a percentage of GDP in our country. That is unacceptable. The last 2 years we're at 2.9%. This year's at 3%. That is inviting problems, and we've got to get after that. We got to spend it better. Lord knows we need to be wiser about it, but we also have to recognize that we have gone from a strategy that focused on fighting 2 wars simultaneously and successfully and defending the homeland to 1 war successfully and defending the homeland. the world is too volatile for that. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you. Just a couple closing observations. First of all, I love what Mr. Sankar said there. I think unity is the most highly overrated thing that I've ever come across. It was, oh, no, we can't have disagreement. We can't. There are political sides to that to create problems. No, I mean, you need to challenge assumptions. And a lot of times when people are pushing for unity, they're basically pushing for you to shut up and do what they want, as opposed to challenging it. So we need to move past that. I think the readiness point you made at the end is something I hadn't thought of, that I think our readiness subcommittee should really take a serious look at. How are we training our service members right now to go into battle, acquisition and procurement notwithstanding? Hadn't thought of that point. The big thing on the, and I agree with the chairman, that we have given DoD the authority they need to do, to your point, a problem-solving based acquisition process. But what we haven't done is we haven't given them the money. At the end of the day, that's the real problem. They will replicate, or I don't know, I think it's classified what it spends, and I don't know. So whatever number, but it's not in the billions. Let's put it that way. It's a very small amount of money, as are most of the OTA authorities. So we lock people into the money. So I really want to sort of get after how can we free up more money, whether it's 25% of the budget or whatever percent of the budget, to get outside of that. And I think that falls on Congress. And that's what when you think about how Congress approaches this, a point I haven't made at this hearing that's really important, and how I think this committee has really changed and evolved from when I first got on it a long time ago. We are less parochial than we used to be. It's still a problem. And when Congress, when we want to look at, okay, how can we help? Stop defending every last project that's in your district and in your state. That really impedes the ability to be flexible, and it turns it into a fight just to preserve things for the sake of them being in your district. In political, I'll tell people, everyone thinks that's the key to winning the election. I always love to tell the story of the A-10. You know, we had to protect the A-10, and I'm not going to get into the argument of whether or not we really needed it or not. But first, we had to protect it because of Ron Barber. He was in a swing district. It's going to be difficult. He's going to get killed if we did. We protected it. He lost. Then we had to protect it from Martha McSally, and we did, and she lost twice. I mean, you can get reelected without just trying to bring home all the money to your district. Honest to God, you can't. So please, let's move past that. And then the second thing, to defend DoD a little bit, part of the reason that they don't want to step out and make difficult, change-oriented decisions is because in addition to us being parochial, the other thing we love to do is grandstand at the expense of the DoD. Okay, if someone makes a decision, makes an innovative decision, and it doesn't go well, we talk all the time about how DoD needs to be tolerant of failure. We're not tolerant of failure, you know, because we want to give it. No, I want you to make sure that this never happens again. You will rarely hear me ever utter that sentence, you know, because you can't. And trying to make sure nothing bad ever happens again leads to all kinds of bad decisions. So I hope we'll think about that too as we try to figure out how to work better with Congress. The closing comment, I think I want to really amplify what Congressman McCormick said. Yeah, there's problems with conflicts of interest, there's problems with Congress, there's problems with prime contractors, but at the end of the day, the biggest impediment to what we're trying to do here is what Richard said, resistance to change. Okay? That, if we could smash any one thing, the resistance to change is what we have to smash in order to successfully implement the changes that we've talked about today. But again, I want to thank the chairman very much for this hearing. This has been incredibly informative, and we will build on it going forward. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But we're not in service of those very valuable goals that the chairman and ranking member just laid out. We're not on a basketball court uncontested. You know, there are a group of people assembled to try to figure out how we never change, because that's how they make money. And that's how they pay their dividends. And and by the way, that's an incredibly sophisticated infrastructure. Mr. Ludwig, you said earlier that the next big innovation will be a software innovation, not a hardware innovation. Just expand on that briefly.
Fundamentally, AI is a software problem. I think there's a lot of talk about chips and advanced chips. The reality is the chips are good enough that we have today to do extremely advanced things. Many of the hardware systems that are involved in making planes and boats are commodity parts. The little electric motors, the little lithium batteries that exist in planes, these are commodity parts. The sensors that exist in your smartphone are plenty powerful enough to be on a missile. The real innovation and the real discriminator is going to be the software capabilities that these systems have.
Yeah, so, and Mr. Senker, you said the principal takeaway you want us to draw from your appearance today is the need for more competition across all of these. Software is certainly not an exception to that, right?
Absolutely. I would even go even further. It's like software is a unique American strength that we're so good at as a country that we tend to underestimate how good we are at it.
Right, but we can only be that good with the competition. And
Yes.
here's the point I want to draw out. So we go back to sort of my favorite punching bag, the F-35. So on the F-35, we go buy the $100 million commodity, right, the hardware, and then we put into our decision-making a full system performance contract for Lockheed. So now if anything goes wrong with anything software-wise, the point of entry to be able to solve that problem is the entity that created the problem and wants you to buy 10 more $100 million paperweights. So, I guess I would ask, do you believe it's wise in this era of great software innovation for us to ever again, on any platform, give a defense company a full system performance contract, Mr. Ludwig?
I strongly feel that Congress should encourage that hardware and software are competed and procured separately, and this allows strong software companies to put their best foot forward and provide their best innovation, and strong hardware companies can put forward their best innovation.
And now, by force of law, we have no ability to do that. If one of you showed up tomorrow with a widget to make the software work better on the F-35, you would have no point of access to be able to present that solution because of the way we've chosen to give the 5 legacy defense contractors these type of full system performance things. So like while I really think the chairman, Chairman Whitman, a bunch of our team members on armed services did hard work to try to limit our purchase of the $100 million paperweight. At the same time, what we didn't do was unlock the competition on the existing commodity. And if we do that, I think that your goals would be more easily achieved. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be parochial in saying whichever of you two gentlemen are chair next year, I hope this can be a tradition in coming to my district once a year. I think it's a helpful thing you've started. And I have two questions. One, do you have any recommendations of people who understand the industry, technology, but also would be effective in the Department of Defense, who would be good people for either the new president to appoint? Does anyone have recommendations? Yeah.
I have maybe a broader observation, not specific names. One of the things, I've worked with the Israeli government since 2014, and it is a country that thinks very highly of its own technical capabilities, correctly so. When they mobilized 360,000 reservists after October 7th, those reservists, now with 2 decades of industry experience, were horrified at the state of technology in the IDF. That is an implicit self-critique of their younger 20-year-old selves, that they had all the IQ, they had all the skills, they didn't have the experience. We have that experience in this country in spades, and creating opportunities for part-time service members, leveraging Space Force's part-time authorities, creating opportunities for America's unique tech industry to be able to contribute, provide advice, guide our senior military leaders would be uniquely valuable. And often, the most important advice is what not to do, because that person's already screwed it up in the private sector and knows that this isn't going to work. Here's an easy way to save $10 billion. And I think it's a missing natural resource that we're not leveraging. It's maybe the new equivalent of the dollar a year man that we use to great effect to win World War II.
So I do have names. I could follow up with you afterwards, but it's more important from like who you're looking for, and I think it's about you're looking for people who are working to solve these problems every day, who have actually solved them in terms of scaling, who know the problems inside and out. One of my major challenges, one of the complaints that I have about the leadership in DoD, they're not actually solving the problem. They're not on our side of the table trying to figure out how to scale, how to get a company's product into the warfighter's hands every single day. And so when I talk to them about the problems, they visualize them as very abstract. Or if you talk to industry, I think what you've seen here is very, very tangible. Like every single person at this table has felt and experienced those problems. So I'd claim you want someone, if it relates to acquisition or scaling innovation, innovation in the Defense Department, someone who has actually gone from 0 to $1 billion in the Defense Department. And if you look at the list of the names who have actually been there and done that and led it, there's probably 3 on the table.
I would just encourage you to, given that there is going to be a transition, to be specific. I mean, my view is, for example, Ash Carter was very, very forward-looking in that and made a huge difference. And whether it's at the Secretary of Defense level or below, if there are specific names or people you think would be good, giving them to either the chairman or the ranking member, I think would be helpful. And my second question is more broadly, in Silicon Valley, one of the challenges is a lot of candidly, the recruiting happens at the top 10, 15, quote-unquote, universities. And I've always said that DOD could be one of the places that young people get to go for technology talent, which is not just the top 15 universities, where they're contributing, getting training, and then can go into the private sector. How are you seeing that pipeline of young folks in technology, AI, other places, and could DOD be one of the first hires for some of those individuals?
Absolutely, Congressman. I think one of the most interesting programs that I've seen recently, in another life, I also serve on the Software-Defined Warfare Commission with the Atlantic Council, and one of my fellow commissioners is the president of Purdue University, and introduced me to this new organization called DCTC, or the Defense Civilian Technology Corps. So it's like a ROTC analogy, but for the civilian portions of the government. I thought that was fabulous. And so I did some research on that. I think that is a great program and should be continued.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And some of the things that struck me was that there's a lot of stuff that we sent to Ukraine that they don't use. Is that right? Do you think that's done on purpose? There's stuff that we know that doesn't work anymore that we're sending over there, or is it stuff that they asked for that now they figured out doesn't work? Which is it?
I don't think there's, I hope there's not malintent. I don't think there's malintent. I think it's people, when you give something, that there's no better customer than a warfighter using your product. You'll find out really fast if they're going to, that's how we measured like our success actually, was how often would a warfighter take our product over someone else's product onto the battlefield. That was the measure of success. It wasn't because at the end of the day, they're making a choice. You can only carry so much with you, and they have to make a very deliberate choice of what they're bringing. And so they have made their deliberate choice by not bringing a vast amount of U.S. equipment that's sitting over there.
But again, the question again, you kind of dodged the question, okay? There's stuff over there. Did they ask for it, or we just send it to them? And are we sending it to them without them asking for it? Are we sending them stuff that we know doesn't work and we're just getting rid of it? Because we know we don't need it anymore over here.
It's probably a combination of the both.
That's troubling.
Yeah.
Because then you have this figure of billions of dollars of American aid that are going to Ukraine that people are going bananas about. And a lot of it, I don't know how much, we got to dig into that one, is actually just stockpiled somewhere because it's useless to the Ukrainian and to the war effort. And again, if I were over here, maybe I'd want to get rid of some of that stuff that I know doesn't work, all right, and send it over to them and let Mikey eat it, okay, because I don't really want it. So that's something, that's another avenue that I'd like to pursue, but not in this right here. Is it possible with AI and automation that we can turn let's say, a 4th generation fighter into a 5th generation fighter, into a 6th generation fighter, giving them more capability because you take the pilot out?
Yes.
Boy,
100% have, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think about that a lot. There's 4,000 F-16s in the world, right? I tell people there's already a long laundry list of potential CCAs that we're already sitting on. Which
is exactly where I want to get to, because they already are there. Instead of buying 5th and 6th generation stuff, we already have 4th generation stuff that's sitting there. Can we increase the capabilities by automating them, getting rid of the pilot, getting rid of the life support systems, all that, and also enhancing the capability of that aircraft, because probably the aircraft capabilities are hindered by the human body. They can only take so many Gs, et cetera, right? AI can take, I don't know how many Gs, whatever.
You could absolutely retrofit all of those aircraft. The U.S. Air Force retrofitted aircraft for the purposes of the DARPA program that Shield AI was a part of. And so you could do it at a greater scale. There are pros and cons to doing it.
I would just add, absolutely, the most fragile component of an aircraft at this point is the human body. The hardware capabilities definitely exceed what is possible with a human pilot, and I'm optimistic that very advanced AI technologies really could unlock a lot of new capabilities.
Yes, go ahead.
If I add one point to the point of competition here, it's like when we consider the next generation coming, we've already sunset the legacy without making the next generation prove its worth. You know, as we think about funding counterfactually the F-35, why aren't we encouraging the legacy platforms to innovate and compete and be relevant in the next fight? Make the F-35 earn its place rather than bestowing its future and closing out on all the systems and capabilities that we have today.
That's interesting because one of the problems that we have is the production, right, of these aircraft, whereas the Chinese right now are able to outproduce us. Maybe that gap can be closed by thinking about it in a different way. And so I find that to be very interesting. I'd like to get more into it, when we have some more time. Finally, on the issue of promotions, I agree with some folks, I guess, up here that the way that we promote and we move our personnel around all over the place every 3 years because, that's got to be 3 years, you got to move on, is insane. It's actually insane. I was mayor of Miami-Dade County. I wouldn't say, well, you've been the director of solid waste for 3 years. I got to move you now to animal services. No. Okay, you've been a great director of solid waste. You're going to stay in solid waste. Thank you very much. But I guess, with them, it's well, I want to get to 4 stars. And I'll give you an example. I have a really, really good commander of Southern Command who is respected tremendously in South America, Central, her area. Tremendously, okay? They love her. She has to move. Why? Well, her time's up, right? She can't get another star, all right, but she has to move, okay? And so, I think that's something else we need to break. I understand the need to move around and to understand the entire force and all that, but sometimes when somebody's critical, maybe just instead of being, well, that only calls for a 1 star, well, maybe I ought to make, okay, now it's 2 star, all right, because they've done such a good job, but it stays there. And so that's just an editorial comment on my side. Do you guys have anything to comment on that?
High level, I absolutely agree. I think it's important that deep expertise it takes a long time to build. And certainly we see sometimes that an individual who has developed deep expertise is then moved on to something else, and that expertise vacuum is a real problem.
I also completely agree with your comments. It's also about accountability, right? If you have a program manager who takes over a program that seems to be failing in the first year, or even the first 2 weeks, right? How do you hold that person accountable? You need someone there for the duration. Them hitting milestones or very clear milestones along these programs where they can be held accountable.
Okay, thank you. You have my time.
Ms. Jacobs of California.
Thank you. In order to give my friend over here who represents the F-35 factory a break, I'm going to turn us from F-35 legacy systems to shipbuilding legacy systems, and I represent San Diego, so I'm doing this to myself, Mark. Mr. Jenkins, I imagine you on the panel have the most experience on this, but of course any of you are welcome to weigh in. Obviously, shipbuilding has been another area where it's been incredibly hard to modernize and to figure out how we do things differently. And, in recent years, we've seen success in industries like drones and other areas. But given the historical challenges and the current need for shipbuilders to keep pace, what specific strategies or reforms could you help us think through in shipbuilding or the shipbuilding industry to embrace the same level of innovation that we've seen in other areas?
So thank you for the question. It's a big question. Shipbuilding is a complex piece. I think what was earlier with the requirements and having narrow requirements would lead to more efficient, smaller ships. Probably they're more effective and they'll be dynamically changing. I think hypersonics have changed the face of naval warfare forever. You're not going to deploy large ships for deployed. They'll be standing back out of their range or transfer to a UUV or a submarine world with long-range fire. So that will be supported by a large fleet of unmanned systems, air, surface, underwater, to give you the ISR targeting information for your services to hit. So it's a rapidly evolving piece. We still need ships. It's not a replacement for ships. You're still always going to need ships. They're incredibly capable when needed, but we can't build them fast enough. Even if you had all the money in the world, with our shipbuilding capacity, you could not produce them faster and better and quicker and better ships. So we have what we have. Making the best use of the ships we have by augmenting them with new devices is going to be the best way to get more days at sea, more days on mission.
Did anyone else want to add?
I'd have one more thing to add on shipbuilding. We power HT Hyundai's shipbuilding in Korea. They're one of the largest. Secretary Del Toro went over there, saw what they were doing, how automated and wonderful the software was, and said, why can't we have this in the U.S.? And really, you can. I mean, it's a U.S. company that's powering this. In my own interactions with the shipbuilding industrial base, I've been told numerous times, look, if I get more efficient, I'm just going to have to give this profit back in a recompete. So I think there is a role of thinking through the complicated incentives that actually drive people to want to go faster, to make it in their self-interest, to actually serve the national defense strategy.
Mr. Chairman, maybe this can be a good Alabama-California shipbuilding collaboration. I also wanted to ask you, I think that we have we've foot-stomped a lot, everyone here, that it's a culture issue at DoD that we're dealing with, right? And some of that culture is derived from leadership, as Mr. Jimenez, as Mr. Khanna both have sort of talked about. But obviously we know that leadership is only one piece of culture and cultural resistance. And as folks who run or work in big private sector companies, do you have any other specific steps you would advocate for us to think through in terms of changing this culture or the entrenched mindset? So, for instance, examples of accountability mechanisms, leadership evaluations, innovation performance reviews. Like, how would you think, if you were going to have to sort of try and, well, for lack of a better metaphor, move the aircraft carrier that is the DoD into this better, direction, in addition to leadership, are there other specific things we should be thinking about?
I just think a lot about incentive structure, and that's what private industry will focus a lot on, right? Is, do you have the right incentives that are going to drive the right behaviors? Do you have the right accountability that's going to drive the right behaviors as well? But those two go hand in hand. But you can incentivize people to do incredible. There are incredible people, as you all know, in the Defense Department. Sometimes they're stuck under a rock, but if you have the right incentive structure in place, they can move mountains and will move mountains.
I'd add one comment. I would second Ranking Member Smith's comments that really we need to create a culture that fosters risk acceptance. When we're doing new venture formation, you're lucky if 1 out of 10 of these things really work, and you're betting on the trend, the ability to learn. So thinking about how we encourage and accept the risk in the portfolios that we're going after here is, I think, very important. I hear almost as like a shibboleth. People, general officers will tell me, well, we've proven that, we need the congressional oversight because we've proven that we're not good at spending taxpayer money.
That's true.
But it's almost become, it becomes self-defeating. It's like by creating processes that make sure that nothing goes wrong, you also create processes that make sure nothing can go right. And it constrains you to mediocrity. And so I would gladly accept more failure if it meant that we had more catastrophic success as well.
Yeah. And my last question, again, for Mr. Jenkins, SDrone has been one of the big success stories of DIU. How can we do more of that? How can we have more success stories, right? Because for every one of you, there's a number of companies that weren't able to get the funding they needed or couldn't get through the bureaucracy even with DIU. So do you have suggestions for us on how to make DIU easier to work with or anything like that?
So I think it's a good time to point out that even though we are hailed as one of the best success stories, we were one of the first projects funded by Ash Carter back in 2016. Incredible impact on the Navy in an operational field. We still do not have a program of record. So the system has not been able to get itself into a way that says this is not even just promising, this is a system that does what we want, it's cheaper, it's better, it's faster. They can't pay for it. And what we're seeing is a whole plethora of Band-Aids, or whether it's SBIRs or AdFit or Replicator, they're all just congressional plus-ups as Band-Aids to try and give them more things. And what we need to do is say, no, there's lots of amazing R&D, innovation. How do you take that and put it into operations? So as you're saying, it's incentivizing the folks who control the Cocoms budget, the fleet budgets, they have to be incentivized to take risks. Otherwise, the system will never reform itself. So lots of ways to do that, but I think DIU's, off your question, but DIU's been a great initiative. It's got us to where we are. It's fantastic. Huge support. Thank them a lot. But there's almost no stepping stone to go into operation, so we have to create that vehicle to do that. Again, DIU has done very successfully. It's done the kind of the project-based requirements rather than setting strict requirements. It said, we have this problem, give me air superiority. I don't care whether it's a plane or a missile or a bomb. And that's been very quick to get commercial minds on the case, which is what drives innovation.
Got it. Thank you.
Young lady from South Carolina, Ms. Mace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe, Mr. Valentine, you mentioned it sort of in passing earlier, and I'd like to maybe have a slightly more in-depth conversation. Talk to us about chips.
Yes, Congresswoman. I think it's pretty well known that we have a deficit of the ability. Most of our chips are made in Taiwan. They might have been designed in the United States. We send those designs out. They're actually etched. Lithography happens there. Then they are delivered back. So that creates a vulnerability in getting those advanced chips that we may need at any one time. So I personally think that whatever we can do to start onshoring that capability so that we have access to those chips in time of need is of strategic importance.
Anyone else want to chime in on the issue of chips and how we get them here? How do we solve the problem? And then I guess, too, the other question I have, I'd like to hear from everyone who's here today about, the advances in AI and technology, the amount of energy that's needed and going to be needed in the near future to keep up with the advances and how fast things are going. The data centers, is it nuclear? What is it? How do we handle what is going to come in terms of, in order to keep up with the technology, we got to have the energy capability, the energy infrastructure. We have to have the data centers to be able to keep up. How far behind are we on this? How do we solve this problem? How do we keep up with what's happening in this space? Mr. Shanker, you can start.
Thank you. I think this is an opportunity to really organize a whole of government effort. Like, what would it take for us to have 10 times the amount of energy production? We've been roughly flat for the better part of 3 decades or more now, and I think it's going to pose challenges on the grid. The answer is we need all of every type. I don't think it's going to be single modality, but the prosperity, the economic prosperity of our nation here so profoundly depends on this singular starting point in the kind of the value generation supply chain of having enough power to continue to create the advances and maintain our lead as the dominant country with AI.
Anyone else want to chime in? All right, that's all I had, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Veazey, Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question for Mr. Jenkins. You said something very briefly in your testimony earlier about the Chinese and I guess a vehicle that they have that's much superior from certain technological standpoints than Tesla. And I wanted you to touch on how that should be worrisome from a military standpoint and all the things that we've talked about here today. Because we're still having some huge philosophical disagreements on EVs and what role they're going to play in just everyday American society.
Yeah, I think that wasn't my testimony. It might have been one of
maybe it was. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes.
So I think the important thing to understand is that there is an enormous amount of innovation happening in China. The automotive industry there is incredibly competitive. There's over 140 Chinese car companies. And of those 140, I would say probably 20 of them are, I would say, best in breed. That would be fully competitive globally. Importantly, the rate of software updates that go to their vehicles is much faster than what you would typically be used to in most types of vehicles on the road. And the pace of innovation is so fast that leaders in the auto industry, they are now making it a point to travel to China on the order of every 3 months just to see the latest software updates that are going to these vehicles. And this really underlines the importance of enabling rapid software updates for all of our hardware systems, because hardware can become obsolete very quickly without up-to-the-minute software.
I just was curious about a little more clarification about some of the Ukraine aid that Congress has approved. And you mentioned that you got zero of those dollars. So are you benefiting at all? Because I know you talked a lot about all of your involvement some more than others. But, is it worthwhile for us to continue to invest? I want to make sure our dollars are, it's easier to get more of Congress to approve this type of aid if we can guarantee that our dollars are benefiting our defense industry. So it would be helpful to know, or maybe to not, if you can shed light on that, if that aid that we are approving is somehow helping you all.
Congresswoman, again, I can't directly trace a dollar that is currently bought one of our drones to send them over. I know the U.S. Department of State has purchased several that they have delivered to both members of the Ministry of Interior and other organizations within Ukraine, to include the Office of the Prosecutor General. But to be honest, I don't know where those dollars are coming from. I will tell you, though, the funding is making a difference, and I think it is instrumental because it helps Ukraine, it helps America and our industrial base, and quite frankly, increases our competitiveness, which hurts our competitors. So from those three perspectives, I think it's a no-brainer.
I would just add, I think it's a good thing. I think it incentivizes companies to go out there and solve the hard problems, knowing that there is aid, knowing that there is opportunity. Should you solve those hard problems, gets a lot of companies to go out and figure out how to solve them.
And it sounds like, and I think you even used the words, it was a laboratory or test bed for you all. So that's good, because we know that the battlefield is changing. We know it's changed from Vietnam to when we fought in the Middle East to now what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And we know that the battlefield for probably Southeast Asia is going to look different as well. So you've probably made a lot of progress in that European domain space and what that Russia-Ukraine battle looks like. But are you able to make any progress in Southeast Asia? We would probably predict that that's where our potential next fight would be at. Is there anything going on that's enabling you to make the kind of progress that you've made in Ukraine and apply that to Southeast Asia?
Yes, the principal difference in Ukraine is actually something everybody expects in a China-Taiwan conflict as well, and that's just the prevalence of electronic warfare, right? The Chinese see that the Russians are being very successful with electronic warfare, jamming GPS, jamming communications. And the Ukrainians, and we see that the Ukrainians are also very successful jamming GPS and jamming communications. And so I think it is very reasonable. It's reasonable to expect everybody in the DoD knows, and China has tested this in the Strait where they're jamming GPS and communications. So the point of a battle lab of what's going on in Ukraine, is it going to have relevance in China-Taiwan? Absolutely. There are other subtle differences, right? Okay, it's a principally maritime environment. The geographies or the distances are much longer because it's a maritime environment, because it's an island. But I think that those core principles of, hey, you're going to be operating without GPS and communications, those are enduring.
That's good to hear. And then I guess those lessons learned that you all have learned, because we obviously don't have U.S. troops on the ground, thankfully, in that conflict. So are you able to communicate, and is the military listening to those lessons learned and be able to hopefully apply that to? I know you've talked a little bit about how we're not practicing how we would conduct warfare. So I just want to make sure those things that you all have learned as civilian companies are getting translated to the military.
They are, and there are pockets of success. That's what I'll say. It's not, so me to say broadly, yeah, everything gets disseminated down the chain of command, I would think would be, or to every operational command is absolutely not true. But there are pockets of success where commands take those learnings and translate them down into action.
Well, please be a loud, squeaky wheel, and we'll try to help. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Interesting, Mr. Jimenez. I thought you brought up an interesting point about retrofitting aircraft. My personal opinion, I don't think it's worth it, and here's why. Because, like, take an F-16, who has a great roll ratio, one of the fastest, one of the best G ratios. The problem is that it is still designed around a human to begin with, and so you're never going to be up to upgrade the capability of stressing the airframe beyond the human being, which we designed it around. And so, and quite frankly, the biggest loser in all this is really the good movies we're going to make, because when the dogfighting is over, and those days are actually gone already. I don't even know why we bother doing dogfighting, because quite frankly, It's back in the Jaeger days. Jaeger used to always say that the first pilot who sees the other pilot wins because you put yourself in that. Those days have been gone for a long, long, long time. Now it's the best person who has the best radar and the weapon and can fire the furthest way wins because you're going to fire before you ever see him and you turn around. That's our dogfight now. It's ridiculous that we even have G-rated aircraft that, I mean, other than to evade. And we know that our evasion capabilities aren't going to exceed whatever some little tiny missile is for Gs. So we're kind of, once again, thinking futuristically. Retrograding doesn't really help us, quite, in my opinion. We need systems now that are smaller, more maneuverable, require less fuel. These systems are based way too large, and we need to scale down. That's my personal opinion on that as a kind of a pseudo-expert, if you will. Ukraine, you know, one of the things I thought was interesting, everybody gets really upset in America about now wasting money in Ukraine and how inefficient we are, and we're sending the wrong weapon systems. It pales to what we did in Afghanistan. We did not learn a lot of lessons in Afghanistan we should have, but one of the things is we sent so much money and so many things that they could not use over there constantly because of our contracting, and this is recent, by the way, that it was criminal when I was over there. Literally, we had parts that show up for 5 tons that were from Humvees on purpose, and I know it was on purpose, and we did nothing about it in our accountability, and now all of a sudden we're going to be accountable in Ukraine, where we're 20 times at least more accountable in Ukraine than we ever were in Afghanistan when we never talked about it. I think it's hypocritical. So I hope we do get our stuff together when it comes to Ukraine, because the American public is watching. We are accountable to them, so those are 2 topics. Somebody else already that had very strong opinions on, I just had to state. And then the final one Ms. Mace brought up I thought was really interesting. When it comes to what TSMC does for us in the AI production, we have the CHIPS Act, but in my opinion, I'd like to hear your opinion as a community. I don't think the CHIPS Act really brings enough home when it comes to the most advanced chips, the AI chips, because the CHIPS Act addresses chips that we use for our cars, you know, cars that drive themselves, stuff like that. That's great. But the real AI, the leading edge technologies, we're not bringing home. And we do have an adversary who's saying we are going to take Taiwan, which means that they're going to control basically 100% of our AI production in the future. I don't think we're talking about it. I think we thought the CHIPS Act solved it. I don't think we're having a realistic conversation in Congress about that. Do you agree or do you disagree with my assessment of not bringing home enough quickly enough, given the threat to taking out 100% of our chip production on the leading edge?
Congressman, I admit I am not an expert on the CHIPS Act, but I agree with your thesis that we need to bring home the chips and do it fast.
I would just add to that. I think I applaud Congress for pulling the CHIPS Act together. I think there are things money can't buy. Implementation. And so the Japanese started building their TSMC fab a year after us, and they're already done. You know, where is the organizing whole of government effort to pull this together as a cross-functional effort to make sure that we build this thing as quickly as possible? We solve all the problems. There's going to be so many problems between here or there. It's not as simple as just cutting a check. We got to organize around it, as this nation is so capable of doing.
And it just in that saved round too. I think we need to do the same thing with our production of medications, because I think there's too much quality control we don't have that's over there that we need to bring back home, because we're getting bad drugs, poisonous drugs, ineffective drugs, and we don't do any sort of an investigation like we do on our own homegrown products. And I think it's absolutely dangerous to our future. Thank you. With that, I yield.
I really appreciate y'all making yourselves available. This has been very helpful, and thank you very much. We are adjourned.